The cold comes first as sound. You hear it before you feel it. Wind high and thin, whistling over the ridge and clawing at the turf walls of your home. Outside, the world is a blind white. Inside, it is night in the deepest sense of the word. Midwinter darkness, pressing low over the Longhouse. You are not awake when the fire dies. Sometime after midnight, when the last tales have been told and the final bowl scraped clean, the central hearth settles. Flames shrink, fold into orange coals, then disappear under a skin of ash. No one gets up to add more wood. The Longhouse sighs and goes quiet. In our world, this is the moment that would send a jolt of panic through the house. A boiler failed at 3 a.m, a power cut in a snowstorm, radiators cooling, thermostats blinking off. We are used to believing that warmth comes from a system out there. Pipes, grids, devices. And when it falters, we feel naked. Here no one panics. You sleep along the wall on a raised wooden platform. Beneath you, boards, straw, old rushes, a beaten woolen cloth. Over you, rough blankets, sheepskins, maybe the heavy weight of a bearskin shared with kin. Behind the thin partition, cattle and sheep breathe slowly in the byre, their bodies giving off a low, steady heat. A brother shifts closer. In his sleep, someone mutters, pulls a fur higher, and sinks back into dreaming. The fire is out, but you are not cold. What keeps you warm is not the flame in the middle of the room. It is everything else. The house half buried in earth and turf, holding on to yesterday's heat. The roof and thick walls that let almost nothing escape. The bed that turns your own body into a furnace. The woolen fur that traps small pockets of air and refuse to let them go. The food you ate hours ago, still burning slowly in your belly. The work your muscles did in daylight, still echoing as a quiet inner fire. The simple fact that you are not alone. We live in a time of central heating, double glazing, heated floors, and electric blankets. Yet so often we sit hunched and shivering, or wake in the night in dry, restless rooms. The slightest failure of the systems around us feels like a crisis. For the people of Viking times, warmth was not a gadget. It was a system woven through everything they built and did. Their secret way to stay warm without fire was not a single trick, but a web. Architecture, bedding, clothing, food, movement, community, and mindset all pulling in the same direction. When the flames went out, that web held. To understand how they survived winters that should have broken them, and what their invisible warmth system can still teach us, we have to step back into that dark longhouse and look again. Not at the fire, but at everything that kept you warm when it died. If you close your eyes and picture surviving the cold, your mind probably summons a certain image, a blazing fire, throwing out golden light and visible waves of heat, people huddled, close, hands stretched toward the flames, backs turned to the darkness. In movie after movie, in survival manuals and advertisements, the message is the same. If you are cold, build a bigger fire, add more wood, get closer. It feels obvious. Heat is fire, fire is warmth. That instinct is so deeply wired into us now that it's easy to project it backwards onto the Vikings. We look at reconstructions of their longhouses and zero in on the hearth, the obvious focal point, the glowing heart of the building. We imagine everyone crowded right beside it through the endless winters of the north. We assume that if the flames were big enough, the cold would be kept at bay. Except in a Viking longhouse, if you were standing right next to the fire for very long, something else would happen before you got cozy. You would start to choke. An open hearth in the centre of a turf-walled building produces light, warmth, and something modern images politely ignore. Smoke. Thick, greasy, eye-stinging smoke that has to go somewhere. In many longhouses, it went up toward a smoke vent in the roof. Slowly, imperfectly. It also spread sideways, pooled under the rafters, and leaked out every crack the wind could find. The closer you stood to the flames, the more your eyes burned and your lungs protested. Heat in a Viking home was not a simple gift. It was something you negotiated. So most of the time, people didn't crouch around the fire as closely as our fantasies suggest. The hearth was certainly important. It cooked the food, dried clothes, warmed tools, gave light, and set the social centre of the room. But it was not a constantly roaring survival blaze, built to heat everybody in the house from a distance. It was usually just large enough to do its work without wasting fuel, and the crucial work wasn't keep the entire volume of air at shirt-sleeve temperature. If you could sketch the invisible heat in the air of a winter longhouse, it would not be evenly spread. Imagine a narrow column of real warmth above the hearthstone, glowing like a candle. Around it, close in, a hot zone where you might stand briefly to toast your hands or dry your socks. A little further out, the warmth thins. By the time it reaches the sleeping platforms along the walls, what is left is only a gentle lift in temperature, a slightly kinder air than the deep cold outside. That is a hard thing for a modern mind to accept, because we are used to the idea that heating means filling an entire space with warm air. Our homes are designed around this expectation. We seal windows, insulate walls, and then push hot air or hot water through systems that work day and night to keep the whole interior at a constant temperature. When we enter a cold room, we do not ask, where is the one warm place? We ask, why is the whole room not already warm? The Vikings didn't think like that, because their tools and their environment didn't allow it. Wood for them was was cheap, infinite resource. In the western and northern edges of the Viking world, on Iceland, in the Faroes, on the treeless coasts of Norway, trees were precious. Even where forests stood, felling and hauling wood in winter was costly in time and effort. Charcoal took even more labour to produce. Every extra log on the fire had a price written on it in sweat and risk. A woodpile was not an aesthetic feature stacked happily by the door. It was a bank account, burning huge fires purely to warm air that would immediately rise, leak and vanish into the night did not make sense. So instead of treating the flame as the sole answer to cold, Viking households treated it as just the beginning. The hearth put heat into the building, yes, but almost everything else about the way the house was built and the way people lived inside it was designed to catch that heat, slow it, bend it, and concentrate it where it mattered. This is where the modern campfire fantasy breaks down. When you imagine yourself shivering in the snow and picture salvation as a towering blaze, you're thinking like someone with cheap fuel, good lungs, and no walls. In that fantasy, heat is something you face. You sit in front of it, turning slowly like meat, front warm, back cold. When the flames die, the warmth vanishes. Viking warmth, as strange as it sounds, did not work that way. It was not about fighting cold with constant flame. It was about learning how to make small amounts of heat do more than they had any right to do. That is why, on a midwinter night, nobody leapt anxiously up when the last visible flame folded into ash. The real work of staying warm was not happening in that bright circle over the hearth. It was happening quietly, in the walls, the roof, the platforms, the bedding, and the bodies along the sides of the room. We tend to tell the story of northern survival as a story of more fire, more fuel, more technology. The Vikings built a different story. Theirs was not, how do we make this room hot with fire, but how do we waste as little of this fleeting heat as possible? And how do we arrange our lives so we do not need the whole room to be hot in the first place? To see how radical that difference is, you have to start with a simple, uncomfortable truth. Fire, on its own, is actually terrible at keeping human bodies warm. Stand a little way back from a campfire on a cold night, and you can feel just how fickle fire is. Turn your face toward it, and your cheeks glow. Turn away, and a chill sinks into your spine. Step 2 paces back, and the warmth drops off like a cliff. Your nose burns while your toes are numb. You could add more logs, build the flames higher, send sparks flying up into the dark. Yet most of that extra heat will escape into the sky long before it reaches your bones. An open flame radiates heat, yes, but it also dumps that heat into a vast moving ocean of air. The hotter you make it, the harder it works to lift its own warmth away from you. Hot air rises, pulling in cold air at your level to replace it. Outside, under the open sky, that might be the best you can do. Inside a building, it is wasteful. The Viking hearth was always working against this reality. Picture the Longhouse again. In the centre, a shallow, stone-lined rectangle of coals and carefully arranged logs. Above it, a smoke-blackened patch of roof where a vent lets some of the fumes escape. Around it, an oval of trampled earth where people walk, sit, cook, repair tools and talk. Beyond that, running along both long walls, the wooden benches and platforms that serve as seats by day and beds by night. If you stand near the hearth, you will feel the heat on your skin. Step toward the wall and lie down on the sleeping platform, and the sensation changes. The air around your head is cooler, sometimes even sharp. Your breath steams in front of you on the coldest nights. If you judged warmth by air temperature alone, you might think the room has failed you. But here is the trick. The Vikings were not trying to warm the air. They were trying to warm themselves. Warming air is expensive. Air has mass and heat capacity. It leaks out of gaps, races up chimneys, seeps through cracks in roof planks. To keep a large volume of air warm, you must feed the fire constantly, turning fuel into a steady stream of heat that never quite catches up with the losses. In a damp, windy climate, the leak never stops. It is like trying to keep a sieve full by pouring faster. Warming objects is very different. A slab of stone beside the hearth, a clay pot, a log bench, the wooden bones of the building itself. Once those absorb heat, they give it back slowly, even after the flame has shrunk. Best of all, human bodies layered in wool and fur are exceptionally good at holding on to their own heat if you give them the right conditions. The central hearth did three main things. It cooked food, it dried and cured and transformed materials, and it raised the temperature of the space just enough that other parts of the system could do their work. When you lay down on your straw and wool, you were not depending on the fire to reach you across the room. You were depending on a small rise in ambient temperature, plus the insulation directly around your body, plus the heat your own metabolism produced. Fuel scarcity made this approach non-negotiable. In places like Iceland, archaeologists have traced the rapid reduction of woodland in the centuries after settlement. The first generations cut too much. Forests that had taken lifetimes to grow vanished in a few decades. After that, fuel was never something you could be casual about. Driftwood on the shore, small stands of birch, low shrubs and peat, these were the energy budget of a household. You did not burn more than you had to. On the Norwegian coast, hauling firewood in winter meant labour and risk. Navigating icy paths, managing sledges, cutting in cold that bit, fingers and froze tools to skin. Inland in dense forests, firewood was more available, but snow and distances turned each log into a small victory. Charcoal, which burns hotter and cleaner, costs even more effort, stacking, covering, tending slow, smouldering piles. Every spark you saw in the Longhouse had a trail of sweat behind it. Add to that the problem of smoke. An open fire is generous with it. In a world without modern chimneys, you lived with that generosity in your eyes and lungs. A bigger blaze meant more light and momentary warmth, but it also meant more coughing, more blackened rafters, more risk of flare-ups and stray sparks. A modest, well-managed fire was healthier and safer, and it asked a different question to its people. Not how do we make this bigger, but how do we make this enough? So heat became something you shepherded. When the hearth was lit in the morning, it began warming more than the pot above it. The stones around the fire absorbed warmth. The packed earth floor, trampled and dried, slowly climbed a few degrees above the cold outside. The timber posts drank in heat, just as they had drunk in summer sun months before, when the house was first built or repaired. Everyone moved through this space, their own bodies adding to the total. Breath, sweat, the small rise in temperature around any living thing. By the time evening came, and the last meal was eaten, the Longhouse was not a box of cold air punctured by one hot point. It was a collection of objects and surfaces that had been quietly accumulating warmth all day. When the fire sank down, that stored heat did not vanish. It bled out slowly, and it bled out into a space already arranged to catch and reuse it as many times as possible. The people inside finished what the hearth had started. Once you understand how stubbornly fire tries to throw its heat away from you, the Viking solution begins to look less like hardship and more like engineering. Instead of chasing the fleeting comfort of standing close to flames, they learned to trap what those flames offered and turn their own bodies into the primary heaters. That trapping happened on several levels at once. At the largest scale, the house itself was a kind of thermal shell, turf stacked thick over wooden frames, earth piled against outer walls, roofs thatched with layers of straw and reeds, few small openings to the outside world. All of this meant that the little bit of extra warmth floating around inside had fewer ways to escape. The building did not generate heat on its own, but it slowed the loss of every degree gained from sun, fire, bodies, and animals. Inside that shell, the layout created microclimates. The coldest zone hovered around the door, where drafts slipped in. The warmest air clung near the roof when the fire was high, which is one reason smoke lived there. Somewhere in between was a band of tolerable air where daily tasks happened, and along the walls, just above the floor, was where the quietest miracle occurred. Here, the house and the bed and the body worked together to make small heat feel like enough. The raised platforms were crucial. A few handspans off the ground might not sound like much, but in a damp northern climate, it is the difference between sleeping directly on a heat-sucking surface and lying on something that is allowed to dry and warm. Straw and rushes on those platforms trapped tiny pockets of air around every stem. Woolen cloth over that smoothed the surface, while adding another layer of fibres that held air still. When you lay down and pulled more wool and fur over yourself, you weren't lying in a room and hoping the room would warm you. You were closing a circuit around your own body. Every exhale warmed the little cave under your covers. Every heartbeat drove warm blood through muscles and organs. Your body was always fighting to maintain a stable internal temperature. The Vikings learned, without needing the language of physics, that if you give that inner fire the right surroundings, it will do most of the work for you. This is what capturing warmth instead of chasing it looked like in practice. You did not sit 6 hours by the fire trying to roast the chill out of your bones. You went to your place on the platform, folded yourself into layers, and let your own furnace take over, aided by the gentle lift in temperature the house had achieved during the day. The real heater was not in the middle of the room, it was under the blankets, and it was not only you. Around you, other bodies were doing the same work. On the far side of a thin wall, cows and sheep and goats lay in their own stalls, ruminating, breathing, each one a steady candle of warmth. Their combined heat seeped through timber and chinks into your space. The herd's survival depended on yours, and yours on theirs, in more ways than food alone. A byre attached to the living space did not just make feeding easier, it thickened the invisible layer of warmth hugging the heart of the building. Modern heating systems treat each person as a passive recipient of warmth pushed into the room. The Viking system treated every living creature as part of the heating apparatus. This is why the idea of fire as the primary, heroic source of warmth is a myth when we look at Viking survival. Flames started the process. They boiled the stew that fueled your metabolism. They dried the clothes that would otherwise chill you. They gave off just enough radiant heat to nudge the interior a little above freezing. But if you took away the house, the bedding, the clothing, the animals, and the tight knot of family sharing that space, you could build the biggest fire in the world and still freeze the moment you stepped back from it. In other words, the Vikings did not rely on the fire. The fire relied on everything else. That is the first hint of their secret. They understood in a way we often forget that comfort is not something you buy from a single source. It is something you build by aligning small advantages until they add up to something big. A windbreak here, a layer of wool there, a wall of turf, a sleeping platform, a little higher. A cow in the next room, a dozen people sharing breath and stories instead of attempting to weather the night alone. Put only a fire in the middle of emptiness, and it will burn out, leaving you exposed. Put a modest fire in the middle of a system built to hold and use what it gives, and you can let the flames die at midnight and still wake up warm enough to swing your legs over the edge of the platform in the grey of morning. When we imagine Viking winter, our eyes go first to the glow of the hearth. The longer you look, the more you realise that the glow is a distraction. The real power lies in the shadows, in the shapes of the house, the thickness of the bedding, the weight of the cloaks, the slow pulse of animals, and people lying together. Fire was only the beginning. The first thing you notice is how low the roof is. You have to duck as you step through the doorway, palm on the lintel to steady yourself. Outside, the wind knifes across the yard, picking up fine snow and driving it into any crack it can find. It hits your back like thrown sand. Inside, just 2 steps beyond the threshold, the sensation changes. It is not exactly warm, not at first, but it is different. The wind stops being a force and becomes only a sound, muffled by turf and timber. The air feels heavier, slower. You can sense that something is being held in here. Straighten up too quickly, and your head comes close to the rafters. The Longhouse is not a high, echoing hall like the ones painted in modern fantasy. It is a low, stretched-out space, its proportions almost like a ship turned upside down and buried halfway into the earth. The roof pitches steeply, then swoops down again until the beams are not far above the tallest person's head. Smoke streaks and darkens everything above eye level. The world of soot and spiders lives up there. The world of heat, such as it is, lives down where you are. If you are used to modern homes, this feels wrong at first, even oppressive. Where are the bright windows? Where is the sense of open air? Here, light is something that clings to surfaces rather than filling the room. The fire in the centre throws orange onto faces and table edges and the curves of tools. Beyond its reach, in the corners and along the walls, things are hinted at rather than seen. The outline of a loom, the curve of a shield, the bulk of sleeping forms under furs. Yet, in the middle of a northern winter, this shape, low, thick and narrow, is the first line of defence between your body and the cold. We are used to thinking of houses as places that make warmth. Flick a switch, turn a dial, and the building begins to deliver heat into your life, like a machine that exists for that purpose alone. When the radiators turn off, we talk as if the house has failed. Viking houses did not make heat, they held it. The difference begins with the ground itself. Many longhouses, especially in colder and windier regions, were not simply placed on top of the earth like boxes set down on a table. They were partially sunk into it, or banked around with soil and turf. That earth, dense and slow to change temperature, acted like a massive, invisible blanket wrapped around the lower half of the structure. Walk along the outside of a well-built farmstead in winter, and you see not crisp, vertical walls, but mounds. Turf cut in thick slabs in summer has been stacked like bricks against the timber skeleton. Grass still clings to some of it, now brown and stiff under frost. Snow settles on those mounds instead of piling directly against the wooden boards. The line between the building and the land blurs. To the eye, this can look crude, almost primitive. No straight stone blocks, no towering masonry. To the body, inside, the effect is anything but primitive. The earth doesn't care about the gust that just hit the gable. It barely notices last night's drop in temperature. It moves slowly, absorbing heat during the day from fire and bodies, and releasing it back into the interior over hours. It damps down the violent swings that would otherwise make the indoor climate almost as brutal as the outdoor one. You can think of that turf and soil as a kind of battery without wires. During every hour, the fire is lit. Heat leaks into the walls and the ground, warming them a little. When the flames shrink at night, that same stored warmth bleeds gently inward again, slowing the rate at which the air cools. The building does not stay cozy by modern standards, but it cools at a crawl instead of a plunge. That is enough to make the difference between shivering awake at midnight and sleeping through until dawn. Inside, everything about the shape and layout of the house is bent toward the same goal, not producing more heat, but losing less of it. You feel that most clearly when you move from one part of the building to another. At the doorway, there is always a bite. The air around your ankles remembers the outside world, even with a small porch or a windbreak. Every time the door opens, cold pours in and falls downward like an invisible waterfall. The threshold is a threshold of temperature as well as space. But take just a few steps inward, and the climate changes. The central aisle, where the hearth sits, feels rough and variable. When the fire is strong, it can be almost too much, the skin of your face prickling with heat, while your back registers a faint chill. When the fire is low, drafts can stalk this space, especially at ground level. It is where people move, where you bring in water and wood and meat, where tools travel. It is the road through the house. Along the walls, something else is happening. The raised platforms that line either side are not just benches, they are the main living surfaces. Here, one step up from the floor, you feel the Longhouse design at work. Cold air, heavier, slides down and pools in the central walkway. Slightly warmer air lingers along the walls and above the platforms, especially once people have occupied them for the evening. The packed earth and timber underneath, warmed gradually all day, lend a faint but real gentleness to the wood boards beneath your bedding. When you lie down on one of those platforms, the architecture closes around you like a pair of cupped hands. Above, the rafters trap a reservoir of smoke and hot air that you do not want in your lungs. Below, the packed earth under the house and the turf outside form a vast, slow-acting heat sink that prevents the temperature under your body from dropping as quickly as the air. At your back, the wall itself holds some of the day's warmth. In front of you, furs and wool and straw form the last barrier between your skin and the night. You can feel the stratification of the air very clearly. Lift your hand and wave it above your head, and on some nights you will feel the difference in temperature as you reach into a colder band of air. Stay low, tucked into your nest, and the small, dense space around your body stays strangely stable. The Longhouse does not make the interior climate uniform. It makes pockets of survivable climate where you actually are. There is a reason the ceilings are low. High ceilings are beautiful. They give a sense of air and freedom. They also create a tall column of space you must keep filling with warmth if you want to feel comfortable. Because hot air, given the slightest chance, will rise as far away from you as it can. In a world where fuel is limited, that is a luxury you cannot afford. The Viking house refuses this luxury. It presses the roof down, narrows the volume of air, and accepts that the head will sometimes bump a beam or that tall people will feel enclosed. In exchange, when the fire has done its work and gone to sleep, the air within that smaller volume stays a few degrees higher than the howling cold outside for a few hours longer. In deep winter, those hours are an eternity. Windows are another place where you can see the different priorities. Modern houses have many. We like views, sunlight, a sense of connection to the outside. Glass, even double glazed, remains one of the weakest points in our thermal armour, bleeding heat as if it were wounded. We deal with this by throwing more energy into the system. The Viking Longhouse often has no true windows at all, only small openings, shutters, or translucent coverings that are used sparingly. Light comes from the door, from the roof vent, from the fire, from torches or small oil lamps. To a modern visitor, this can feel like living in semi-darkness. To someone who has spent their life here, it is simply the normal trade-off. Less light in exchange for less heat pouring out through vulnerable panes. Internal doors and partitions follow the same logic. In many reconstructions, you can see how the main living space is partially separated from storage areas, or the byre by wooden walls, half walls, or thick curtains. These are not just for privacy or smell, though those things count. They are also valves. They allow the household to decide when to let air move between zones and when to keep it trapped. Imagine a bitter night, wind hammering the outer wall. The animals are in their stalls, breathing clouds into the air. The family has finished their evening tasks and crawled onto the platforms. The fire has been banked. Someone pulls a heavy curtain across the entrance to the sleeping section. The central aisle, with its drafts and drops, is now partially cut off. The smaller volume where people lie is shielded from the full churn of the house's air. The warmth of bodies, of the adjacent animal space, of the day's heat in the walls, can settle there, thickening the invisible blanket. Everything about the structure says the same thing. Reduce loss, narrow pathways for air to flee, weight the walls, sink the building into something slower and more patient than the wind. From a distance in time, it is easy to underestimate how intentional this was. We like to think of ancient architecture as what people did because they didn't know any better. But cold enforces a ruthless education. If a certain way of building bleeds too much heat, the people inside get sick, or they die, or they are forced to burn twice as much fuel as they can really spare. Over generations, that kind of mistake is burned out of a culture, the way a badly placed door is burned out of a drafty hut. You can see that learning in the way Viking houses evolved from region to region and over time. In tree-rich areas, more timber. In treeless ones, more turf and stone. On coasts lashed by sea winds, profiles lower and more rounded. On inland farms, long houses that make room for more animals and more stored goods under the same insulating roof. The details shift, but the underlying principle does not. You do not wage war on winter by trying to overpower it with fire. You do it by making your home a place where winter has fewer ways in. The contrast with a modern building comes into focus when you imagine the heat turned off in each. Take a typical contemporary house or apartment in a cold climate. Walls made of light materials, perhaps well insulated, perhaps not. Large windows, high ceilings in some rooms, multiple doors to the outside, thin interior partitions. The heating system pumps warmth into each part of the house, making the whole space comfortable. When that system stops, when the power goes out, when the boiler dies, the comfort bleeds away shockingly fast. You can feel the temperature drop, hour by hour. Floors become cold plates under your feet. Windows radiate chill into the room. The vast volume of air you have been casually keeping 12, 15, 20 degrees above the outdoors now begins to slide back toward equilibrium, taking your comfort with it. Unless you have a backup stove and fuel, the house reveals what it really is. Not a furnace, but a shell, sometimes little better than a glorified tent. Now imagine the heat turned off in a Viking longhouse. In one sense, that is exactly what happens every night when the fire is allowed to die down. No more active flame, no more deliberate production of warmth. Yet the house does not instantly betray its inhabitants. The earth around the lower walls, the turf, the heavy timbers, the compact interior spaces, the mass of stored goods along the sides, the neighbouring animal stalls, all of them give back what they have taken in all day. They do not stop the cold, they simply slow it enough that your bedding and your body can finish the job. You, lying on your platform under wool and fur, experience the architecture as a kind of conspiracy on your behalf. You do not think about heat transfer or thermal mass. You think about whether the crack near the door has been stuffed properly this year, about whether the roof vent is drawing well, about whether the byre partition feels warmer tonight than last. You judge by skin and breath, not by numbers on a wall. But underneath those simple sensations, the building is doing complex work. The rafters, for example, are not just structural. Loaded with smoke most of the time, they form an insulating layer in their own way. Smoke and hot air rise and collect there, slowing further heat loss through the roof materials. The rafters darken over years with soot. Every particle there is a memory of fuel burned, of energy released. The zone you inhabit is below that, in a layer that benefits from higher temperatures above and slower cooling at the sides and below. This arrangement has a cost. Your lungs pay it. So do your eyes. Chronic exposure to wood smoke left its mark on Viking bodies, just as it has on the bodies of people in every culture that relied on open fire indoors. Yet from a purely thermal perspective, the smoky rafters are part of the hidden furnace. The house uses every part of the physics available to it, even the uncomfortable ones. None of this means Viking houses were magical. They did not erase the seasons. On the coldest nights, even with all this design, your breath still fogs the air. Your nose can sting. You feel where the fur blanket has slipped off your shoulder. You wake sometimes in the dead of night and know from the feel of the wood under your hand as you reach for your shoes that the air has edged closer to freezing. What the architecture gives you is not an end to cold, but a controllable kind of cold. A world where the difference between inside and outside is big enough that your body's own efforts can bridge the gap. There is a moment each morning when you feel that difference most clearly. You swing your legs off the platform, feet seeking the worn spot where a scrap of cloth or an old pelt tries to soften the boards. The air that flows under your tunic is brisk, waking your skin. You stand, stoop slightly under the rafters, and cross the aisle toward the door. Each step takes you through layers of air, the slightly warmer current near the platforms, the draft in the central lane, the knife at the threshold. When you crack the door open and the real winter rushes in, you feel the Longhouse behind you, suddenly revealed for what it is. Not a warm place exactly, but a defended one, a controlled environment in a world that does not care if you live. When you close the door again, the building starts the work of recovery. As soon as the opening is sealed, the excess currents begin to settle. Someone stirs the embers, a few small pieces of fuel are added. The glow climbs to flame. The cycle begins again. Heat added, heat captured, heat held. Our modern buildings, for all their sophistication, have largely given up on this kind of partnership with physics. We have walls that can insulate well if they are built with care. We have triple glazed windows and clever membranes, but we also crave space and light and views. We design rooms for feeling, not for survival. Then we hire machines, powered by distant fuels, to correct for those choices. When the machines work, this feels like progress. When they fail, the emptiness is revealed. The house grows cold with a speed that surprises us, because we have forgotten what kind of animal we are and what kind of world we live in. The Vikings could never forget. The line between sheltered and exposed was always thin in their world, and their architecture carried that knowledge in every joint and seam. No space was wasted, no surface was neutral. Walls were storage, insulation, structure, and backdrop all at once. Roofs were protection and filter and smoke trap. The house was not a box you lived in. It was a tool you used, tuned by generations of hands that knew exactly what happened when you got it wrong. When you think of their secret way to stay warm without fire, do not picture a single clever trick. Picture instead the shape of the Longhouse itself, its low ceiling, its thick walls banked with turf, its reluctance to open wide to the world. Picture the way that shape catches every small contribution of heat and refuses to let it go quickly. Then picture your own space, high ceilings, large glass panes looking out onto winter, walls that meet the ground with no extra mass piled up against them, a front door that opens directly into a wide hallway where warm air rushes out in a visible puff on cold days, a thermostat that tries to make all of this invisible. Their houses told the truth. It is hard to be warm where the world wants you dead. Our houses often try to hide that truth behind numbers and systems. The Vikings did not have the option of pretending, so they learned to build in a way that let them sleep when the fire went out. Their architecture was a hidden furnace, not because it burned on its own, but because it knew how to hold on to every flicker of heat long after the last log turned to ash. Lie back in your mind, on the raised platform along that long wall again. Feel the rough wood under the straw beneath your shoulder blades, the familiar sag where you have slept every winter night for months. Hear the animals behind the partition shifting, the occasional soft thud of a hoof. Smell smoke, wool, earth. Above you, the rafters disappear into darkness and haze. Straight ahead, across the dim aisle, the hearth is only a faint red eye in the gloom. If you judge by the look of that ember alone, you might think you are one gust away from freezing. If you judge by how your body feels, tucked in, layered, cradled by a building that has learned to stand between you and the sky, you understand the quiet truth that made life possible in Viking lands. The fire can sleep because the house is still awake. The first thing you feel is not the fur against your cheek or the rough weave of wool at your neck. It is the difference in air. Up above, toward the rafters, the air is sharp. If you lift your hand out of the blankets for too long, your skin prickles and the hairs on your arm rise. A breath drawn too high in the room tastes faintly of cold and old smoke. But down where you are, pressed into the layered bedding along the wall, the air changes. It is thicker, softer. You can feel your own warmth building in it, slow as tide water. You are not lying on a bed in the modern sense, a freestanding, spring-loaded object designed to sit in the middle of a room. You are part of the room itself. The sleeping platform is built into the Longhouse, a raised ledge of wood that runs like a continuous bench along the wall. By day, it is where people sit to mend cloaks or carve, where children clamber and play, where elders settle with their backs to the timber and watch the house move around them. By night, it is transformed. Straw is spread, woolen cloth rolled out, furs shaken and laid. What was a piece of furniture becomes something more like a nest. The height matters. If you swing your feet down now, you would feel the difference instantly. The floor, packed earth smeared with old ash and straw, drinks heat. It has been trampled and dampened and scraped for months. In summer it feels cool and solid. In winter, it is a slow thief. Stand there barefoot for long and the cold will climb into your bones, inch by inch, as if the ground were reclaiming what little warmth you have. The platform lifts you away from that. It doesn't seem like much, half a metre, perhaps a little more, but in thermal terms, it is a border. The wood underneath has dried out, warmed a little from the day's fire, and most importantly, sits above the coldest pool of air that is always trying to level itself along the ground. Cold air is heavy. It settles, sliding into the lowest spots. By raising the place where you live and sleep, the Vikings stepped just above that invisible puddle. Look closely at the planks beneath you. They are not perfectly level. Time and use have bent some. But many of these sleeping platforms were built with a subtle intention. A slight tilt so that your head rests a little higher than your feet, or a gentle grade toward the wall. The incline helps with comfort, with breathing and digestion. It also nudges air to circulate in small quiet loops under and around your body, instead of letting dampness linger. On top of those boards lies the real foundation of the Viking bed, straw. It is not romantic straw. It prickles, and tiny broken pieces find their way into seams and hair. You will pick it out of your cloaks for days, but as you shift your weight, you can feel what it does. It springs, it gives. Every stalk creates a thin, rigid line that holds the fibres around it apart. Thousands of those lines piled together make a tangle of tunnels. What fills those tunnels is nothing more than air. We tend to forget that air is the only thing that truly keeps us warm. Fire does not heat our bones directly. It heats air or surfaces, which then heat us. Wool and down and straw are not warm in themselves. They are shapes the air hides inside. The less that air moves, the more it belongs to you. When you lie down, your body pushes into the straw. Some of the stalks bend and break under your weight. Others resist and form a mesh that cradles you. The spaces inside that mesh trap the air your body has already warmed. Instead of flowing away to join the larger, cooler ocean of air in the room, it lingers in your shape. If you were lying on bare wood or stone, your warmth would travel in a straight, efficient line away from you, skin to surface to ground. Nature is ruthless in that way. It equalizes temperature wherever it can. On straw, the path is crooked. Every piece of fibre interrupts it, slowing the transfer. Heat has to jump from stalk to stalk through tiny pockets of still air that resist the jump. Some of that warmth makes it all the way out. Much of it doesn't. It gets caught in the loops and stays near you. This is why, when you first crawl into bed on a midwinter night, the bedding feels neutral or even cool, and then half an hour later, feels as if someone has secretly lit a fire under the platform. No one has. You are the fire. Over the straw lies another layer, wool. The cloth beneath you might be coarse wadmal, the universal Viking fabric, woven from sheep's wool and beaten until it is dense. It is not soft in the way of a modern blanket, but it is tough and forgiving. It keeps the straw from attacking your skin while preserving the breathability of the layer beneath. The wool itself adds yet another maze for air to lose its nerve in. Fibres twisted around fibres, making tiny rooms that warm air is reluctant to leave. The blanket you pull over yourself works the same way, only more so. Hold a piece of woven wool up to the light and you see a constellation of gaps between the threads. To the eye, they are nothing. To air, they are narrow doors. When you lie still, your exhaled breath, your skin, your blood all donate heat to the pocket of air pressed between your body and that layer of cloth. Some of that heat tries to rise. In a wide open room, it would roll off you like mist, mixing quickly with colder currents and vanishing. Under wool, it hits a forest. Each fibre grabs a little energy, warms slightly, and warms the air next to it. The outer side of the blanket stays closer to room temperature. The inner side belongs to you. The result is a gradient, a smooth staircase of heat from your skin to the world. The steps are small enough that the flow is gentle, not a rush. That is the only difference between shivering and sighing with comfort, the speed at which your body loses its warmth. Then there is fur. If you are lucky, if your household has done well, if there has been a good trade or a well-skinned bear in your family history, you feel the weight of pelts on top of everything else. The furs lie like snowdrifts, dense and heavy, their hairs layered in such numbers that air almost gives up. Fur is what an animal grows when it cannot afford to lose heat. It is a master class in survival. Guard hairs to shed water, underfur to hold warmth, skin beneath to anchor the whole system. Now that system is yours. Sweep your hand over the outer surface of a bearskin in the dim light, and it feels cool and slightly oily. Slide your fingers underneath, between fur and wool, and the air there hugs your skin. The hair traps it so tightly that convection, the process by which warm air rises and cold falls, is almost completely choked off. There simply is no room for large currents to form. Temperature changes happen by conduction, tiny collisions of molecules, not by great shuffling movements. Conduction is slower. Slowness here is mercy. You pull the furs up to your neck. Your breath moistens the air under them. The wool and straw below you catch warmth that leaks downward. The wall at your back remembers the long day of fire and bodies and gives back what it can. Within 10 minutes, you feel a change. The house has not become warmer. In fact, the embers in the hearth are fading, red eyes dimming under grey ash. The air in the aisle is cooling. Breath there strips heat from teeth and tongue. But inside your little tent of fibres and air, the opposite is happening. Your skin pulls away from the initial chill of the blankets and relaxes into a slowly rising temperature. Muscles unclench. Fingers and toes, which ached when you first lay down, are now dull and heavy. You shift once, finding the channel your body has already carved in the straw, and settle. It is a strange reversal. In most of life, heat moves from outside in. The sun warms your face. The fire warms your hands. Here, you are the source. The world beyond the bedding is cold, and will always be cold in winter. But you, wrapped in straw and wool and fur, have stopped fighting the whole world's temperature. You are only fighting the few centimetres of space around your body. This is the core of the Viking bed's brilliance. Modern thinking about warmth still clings to the idea of filling a room with hot air and hoping that is enough. We talk about room temperature as if the entire volume of space must be coaxed into friendliness for us to be comfortable. The Viking bed takes a more precise approach. It defines comfort not as a property of the room, but as a property of the microclimate right around your skin. Heating an entire longhouse to a point where you could lie on bare boards in your clothes and feel cosy would have required enormous, constant fuel. Insulation could help, but there are limits. Heating the palm-sized zone of air hugging your chest, your feet, your nose. That is work your own body can do if you give it the right allies. Straw is one ally, wool is another, fur is a third. The final ally is air itself, when it is trapped and tamed. Think of air as a nervous animal. Left free, it is always moving, especially when there is a difference in temperature. Warm air wants to rise, cold air wants to rush in and occupy the space it leaves behind. That endless switching of places is what makes you feel drafts, the constant licking of cooler currents against skin that had just grown used to being warm. The Viking bed, layer by layer, pins that animal down. Between the straw, the air pockets are so small that warm air rising means only that a single tiny pocket shifts its energy to the fibres around it. There is nowhere big enough for a full-fledged draft to form. Between the woven threads and felted layers of wool, the same thing happens. Warmth is distributed by touching, not by flowing. In physics terms, you have reduced convection and forced most of the heat transfer to happen by conduction, the slower process. Slow is the key. Your body keeps adding warmth all night, but it has a limited budget to spend. If drafts and big air movements are allowed, that budget is blown quickly. You feel it as the sinking disappointment of climbing into a bed that was briefly warm and then turned cold when you shifted position. In well-constructed Viking bedding, the budget is spent slowly, in a controlled way, so that the pocket of air around you can stay comfortable for hours. There is a moment deep in the night when this system shows its full power. The Longhouse is almost completely dark. The last log on the fire has long since collapsed inward. Only the faintest red line shows where embers still live, under ash. The sounds have shifted too. Earlier, there was talk, the clatter of wooden bowls, footsteps, the soft thud of someone hanging up a cloak, or shifting a bench. Now there is only breathing. Human animal all together, like waves. You are awake enough to notice. Perhaps the wind hit the wall just right and made a board creak. Perhaps a child turned over and bumped your knee. You blink, eyes open in the cold dark, and do the simple, ancient test. You move an inch. The air outside your covers kisses your cheek and the tip of your nose. It is cold enough to make the tiny, exposed patch of skin ache. But the air against the rest of you has become something else entirely. From neck to ankle, under wool and fur, the temperature feels almost indecently high compared to the night. Your own body has spent hours quietly heating that sealed space, and now you lie in an environment that your modern self might recognize more from a sauna than from a primitive bed. If you slide your hand down to your feet, you feel it even more. They are not icy stumps, not numb as they might be if you had slept in a cold room under a single thin sheet. They are warm, the joints softened, the arches relaxed. The heat has pulled there, caught by the narrow foot of the bedding, where there is less space for it to escape. When you flex your toes, it feels as if you're pushing against water instead of empty air. You are, in essence, inside a small, low-temperature oven that your own metabolism fuels. It is not perfect, of course. If you fling the covers off in a thrash of restless dreaming, the pocket is punctured. If your bedding is thin, or wet, or badly arranged, the system fails. But when everything works, straw layered thickly enough, wool not saturated with moisture, furs intact, platform dry, wall solid, the warmth the bed produces can feel almost magical compared to the chill just a few inches away. The Vikings did not have thermometers. They did not measure degrees. Their knowledge was tactile, built from countless nights of trial, error, and inheritance. They knew that fresh straw worked better than old matted straw. They knew that a damp wool blanket was a misery, yet somehow still less cruel than a damp linen sheet. They knew the difference between a cheap pelt that let wind blow through it and a good one that turned wind aside. Over time, this tactile knowledge congealed into habit. Straw was changed out regularly, sometimes seasonally, especially in households that could afford the labour. Bedding was dried by the fire on rare sunny days, or hung near the smoke where insects hated to dwell. Furs were beaten, shaken and mended. No one spoke of optimizing thermal efficiency. They spoke of comfort, of sickness avoided, of children who slept or did not. If you look at modern bedding through this lens, some of it begins to look oddly fragile. Foam mattresses that trap heat and moisture, creating swamps rather than microclimates. Slick synthetic duvets that let air slide too easily, or trap sweat in a way that leaves you clammy instead of cozy. Beds positioned in the middle of big, open rooms where any warmth you generate is immediately stolen by cubic meters of indifferent air. We have, in many cases, chosen aesthetics and ease of manufacture over the simple question that Viking bedding answered every night: how do we help a human body keep its own heat? There is another difference, quieter and less obvious. You are rarely alone on a Viking sleeping platform. The private bed, large and solitary, and reserved for just one or two people, is a relatively recent invention. In the Longhouse, space is too valuable to give everyone their own island. You lie shoulder to shoulder, hip to hip, sometimes 3 or 4 across. Children tuck themselves into any gaps they can find. When the household is full and winter is deep, you may feel pressed from both sides. At first, this can feel like a loss of autonomy, of personal space, but in terms of warmth, it is a multiplication. Each body is its own furnace. Each, on its own, can heat a small pocket under blankets. Put them together, so close that legs and backs and arms share contact, and you have tied their systems into a network. If one person is younger, runs hotter, their warmth bleeds into the group. If an elder runs colder, the risk of their core dropping too far is cushioned by being physically linked to others. You have felt this phenomenon, most likely, in a modern context, at least once, sharing a small tent on a cold night, piling under a blanket with someone on a couch. The difference between alone and together is stark. Together, even if the room is cold, the space under the shared cover quickly becomes almost too warm. Alone, you struggle to build that same heat with only your own body as source. The Viking bed system simply makes this ordinary human fact structural. It expects and uses it. Furs are sized to cover multiple people. Platforms have no built-in dividers. There might be personal spots where each household member tends to sleep, but those spots are still part of a larger, continuous mattress. Warmth can migrate easily, not just through the air, but through contact. From a strictly physical standpoint, it is hard to overstate how effective this is. Heat moves faster through solids than through gases. When your leg rests against someone else's, warmth does not have to cross a layer of air to reach them. It moves directly through tissue. The result is faster equalization within the group. Peaks and valleys of temperature smooth out. No one gets to hoard warmth entirely. No one is entirely deprived. Again, to a modern individualist, this may sound like compromise or even burden. To a Viking trying to keep a family alive through a black winter in a marginal landscape, it is insurance. The bed, then, is not just a personal hearth. It is a shared one. A slab of wood, a heap of straw, layers of wool and fur, and the bodies of the people you depend on, all combining to create a zone where the outside world's violence is muted. If you pull back now, in your mind, and look at the Longhouse from above, in the darkest point of the year, the image changes. The fire pit in the centre is a dull red wound in the floor, almost healed. The air above it is cooling fast. Toward the roof, the smoke layer is a greasy band. The door is a faint, pale rectangle on one short wall, edged with frost. But along the long walls, on the sleeping platforms, lie shapes wrapped in layers. Each one is a soft heat source. Each one is surrounded by a halo of slightly warmer air under wool and fur. From a thermal perspective, the building is no longer a single room at all. It is a series of tiny, overlapping climates, each anchored by a human being and their bedding. The turf walls and earth beneath keep those climates from collapsing immediately into the night's cold. The bed itself keeps them from dissipating into the larger volume of the house. The person in the bed keeps them alive. We often imagine Viking survival as a matter of toughness, of gritted teeth, of stoic suffering, of simply putting up with what the environment throws at you. There was plenty of suffering, and plenty that could not be engineered away, but the more you look at the Viking bed, the less it seems like an expression of blunt toughness, and the more it looks like an expression of finesse. It uses cheap materials. It uses what the land gives: straw left over from harvest, wool from sheep that also feed you, furs from animals you hunted or traded for. It uses basic physics. Air resists heat flow when still. Fibers can hold air still. Bodies generate heat constantly. It combines those facts into a design that allows a child, an elder, a labourer whose muscles are spent from rowing or cutting wood, to lie down in a structure half buried in frozen earth, and within minutes feel a kind of warmth that would surprise someone who had only seen the cold outside. The embers in the fire pit are optional to this experience. They make it better, of course. They take the edge off the room. But if they die, the bed carries on. In that sense, the Viking bed is the purest expression of the secret way to stay warm without fire. It does not deny how dangerous the cold is, and it does not waste effort trying to heat the unfriendly emptiness of the whole world. It accepts the limits, then quietly builds a little world of its own around each sleeper. One straw, one thread, one hair at a time. You, lying there with your nose cold and your toes warm, become the centre of a small, fiercely defended climate. The Longhouse sheltering that climate is another, larger layer of defence. Beyond that, there is the landscape, indifferent and lethal. Between your skin and that indifference stand wood, straw, wool, fur and air, all arranged by human hands that understood on a level deeper than words that the most reliable hearth in winter is the one you carry inside your own body. You do not sleep alone. That is the first thing to understand, if you want to feel how Vikings survived winter nights that should have broken them, not just emotionally or spiritually, but physically. Warmth was never a purely individual achievement. Here, it was something made between bodies, layered and shared. In our world, the image of a proper night's rest is often a single person in a private box. One bed, one room, one door that closes on everyone else. Peace and quiet if you can afford it. In the Viking world, such isolation would have looked less like a luxury and more like a threat. From the moment you step into the Longhouse at night, you can feel why. It is late, deep in winter. Outside, the sky is a black vault, full of stars that are beautiful and utterly uninterested in whether you live through the season. The yard is hard and creaking with frost. The breath of the cattle in the byre goes up in white plumes, lit briefly by the spill of orange when the door opens. Then the door shuts and the outside world falls away. Inside, the first impression is not of heat exactly, but of density. Sound is thicker in here. The space is full. Tools hanging from beams, bundles of wool and cloth stacked in niches, barrels along the walls, and above all, people. They are not scattered through separate chambers. They exist in layers. Someone stirs a pot over the central hearth. Someone else mends harness near the fire. Children chase each other in the aisle until a parent snaps a few words and they slow to a shuffle. An elder leans back on the sleeping platform, wrapped in a cloak, watching with half-lidded eyes. Every breath adds something to the air. Every body radiates a small, invisible halo of heat. You notice it most clearly if you remember the yard you crossed just now. Out there, the cold was an active force, gnawing at your face and fingers, trying to seize your lungs. In here, it is merely a presence at the edges. It lurks near the door, presses faintly at the drafty gaps, but it does not dominate. The difference is not a roaring fire in the middle of the room. That could never be large enough on its own. The difference is that you're not alone with the cold anymore. There are others between you and it. The day winds down. The pot is emptied, its contents transformed into fuel inside stomachs. Tools are put away. The urgent tasks shrink to a few. Bank the fire, settle the animals, make sure the door is barred. One by one, people climb onto the raised platforms along the walls. This migration might be the single most important warmth ritual the household performs. Though no one calls it that, there is no ceremony, just habit. Someone yawns, pulls off outer layers and crawls under the furs. Someone else follows. The bench that served as seating a moment ago becomes a living organism, sprouting mounds and shapes as blankets rise and fall with breathing. If you are young, you might be last up. There is always one more log to carry, one more bucket to check. When you finally climb onto the platform, you ease yourself into the narrow strip of space that has been left for you between an older brother and a cousin. There is no question of finding your own corner, far away. There simply isn't room, and even if there were, you would not be allowed to squander it. At first it feels crowded. A knee bumps yours, an arm brushes your shoulder as someone turns. The weight of shared furs makes it hard to shift without disturbing your neighbours. The smell is intimate, wool and sweat and smoke, and the faint animal tang of leather and skin. But as you lie still, another sensation rises to the surface. Warmth, low and steady, coming from both sides. You can feel it where your upper arm presses against a rib cage. You can feel it along the line of your back, which is not exposed to a wide gulf of cold air, but to the curve of another human body under layers. The bedding that covers you is not yours alone. It stretches over several bodies, its edges tucked in where someone has learned the best way to keep drafts out. The shared cover traps not just your heat, but theirs. One person trying to warm a large blanket is like a candle in a barn. It can be done, but it takes a long time, and any gush of cold air will snuff out the gains. 5 bodies under the same blanket are more like a bed of coals. Warmth spreads through fabric and flesh, equalizing until the cold has fewer sharp places to dig in. This is not metaphor, it is physics. Every human body at rest gives off a consistent amount of heat, the product of muscles idling, organs working, chemistry never stopping. Alone in a large, cold room, that heat leaks away as fast as it is made. Your body warms the air directly above it. That air rises and is replaced by colder air, and so on, in an endless, quiet churn. Sharing a bed in a narrow space with others slows that churn. The warmth from each person has a shorter path to travel before it meets the warmth from others. There is less outside for the cold to pull from. The Viking Longhouse takes that principle and scales it up. Imagine the building at night as a kind of lung. The animals in the byre, one lobe. The people on the sleeping platforms are another. Each breath they exhale is warm and damp. Each body gives off heat. In a big empty room, those little contributions would drift apart and vanish. Here, in a low, crowded space with thick walls, they add up. Now add the animals properly. On the other side of a wooden partition, cows lie in their stalls. Sheep curl together, noses tucked toward their flanks. Goats shift and mutter. Their sheer mass is impressive. A single cow weighs several times what you do. Inside that mass, metabolism hums. A cow's core temperature is higher than a human's. It burns food to keep blood and organs at that heat, and the byproduct is a constant trickle of warmth into the air. Your ancestors noticed this long before anyone expressed it as a number. They knew that the cattle made the byre the warmest place in the house in deep winter. They knew that a goat pen, when closed, stayed kinder than an empty shed. They learned through generations of aching fingers and hard choices that putting animals in a separate, detached building was a luxury for milder climates and wealthier farms. In harsher places, or poorer ones, you bring the animals into your thermal circle. So the longhouse is not a house with a stable attached. It is a single system with zones. The animals have their space, enclosed and lined with fodder. The people have theirs, laid out around the hearth. The wall between is not so much a barrier as a membrane, letting smells and sounds and, crucially, heat seep through. You might curse the smell at times, or the noise when a cow decides to stand in the middle of the night, but you do not curse the warmth. Livestock are not only wealth on the hoof, they are radiators that eat hay. On nights when the wind shrieks and the fire is low, that shared warmth is more than comfort. It is the difference between the air hovering a few degrees above freezing or well below it, your bed system, the straw, wool, fur, can handle a certain gradient between you and the room. If the room plunges far past that, all your clever layers struggle. The animals move that baseline point upward, bringing the whole interior to a slightly kinder level. You feel this most clearly when you lie where the human and animal zones overlap. Tonight, you have been pushed to the outer edge of the sleeping platform. A new child has joined the family. An injured uncle, normally away at sea, has come home to heal and takes up his old spot. You end up near the partition, where the wall is thinnest. At first, you might be resentful. It is draftier here. The cracks in the boards near your head let in whispers of night. But as you settle, you discover the compensation. Behind your back, through the wood, comes the steady rhythm of a cow's breathing. Each exhale releases warm, moist air into the stall. Some of that air finds its way through gaps into your corner. It is not dramatic. You do not feel a hot wind. But compared to the sharp cold near the door, this edge of the house is surprisingly gentle. Combined with the warmth of the bodies pressed in front of you under the communal furs, you exist in a kind of sandwich. Animal heat behind, human heat ahead, wood and wool and straw in between. The middle of your chest feels as if someone has placed a small, steady hand over it. Your nose is still cold, your fingers still prick if they stay outside the blankets too long. Yet the core of you, the part that matters most for survival, is floating in an environment your modern self might hesitate to call harsh at all. This is not romance. It is the plain fact that, in the battle against cold, mass matters. One person in a large, unheated space is fragile. Their heat has almost nothing to work with. Every calorie they burn to keep their blood at a safe temperature is fighting the entire volume of air around them. 20 people, 4 cows, a dozen sheep, and 3 goats in a sealed, low-roofed space are an entirely different proposition. Their combined heat output changes the environment. They are not just surviving in it, they are reshaping it. Modern science has numbers for this. It can tell you approximately how many watts of heat a resting human emits, how much a cow does. It can model how quickly a room of a certain size and insulation level will warm from that input. The Vikings did not need numbers, they had experience. They would have noticed that a winter house full of people and animals felt different from an empty one. That when half the family left on a journey and some livestock were sold, the air inside felt thinner, harder. That when the household was packed, visitors, in-laws, foster children, perhaps guests seeking shelter from a storm, the cold outside seemed further away. In harsh years, that crowding might have been unpleasant. Food stretched thinner, tempers flared, privacy was almost non-existent. Yet from the perspective of warmth, more bodies meant a stronger shield against the season. When you have lived your whole life like this, the connection between closeness and survival writes itself into your instincts. You understand, without needing anyone to lecture you, that distance is dangerous. An outbuilding too far from the main cluster of houses is where people freeze. A lone traveller trying to sleep away from shelter is courting trouble. Even in summer, when the great doors of the hall are thrown open and sleeping outside under the stars can be a pleasure. The memory of winter remains in the sense that together is safer. That sense is not only physical, it is emotional, and the two are entangled. Lying on that crowded platform at night, you are not just warm because of the bodies against you. You are warm because you are not lying there alone wondering who will hear if something goes wrong. If an ember jumps from the hearth, someone will see it. If enemies come in the night, someone will hear the door. If a child cries out with a bad dream, a hand will reach across the darkness before fully waking. The house does not sleep as a single, oblivious organism. It dozes in shifts. Someone is always half awake with a nagging back, or with the habits of an anxious mind. Someone is always closer to the door, someone closer to the animals, someone nearer the fire. That diffuse vigilance is part of what allows others to sink down into deeper, more generous sleep. Modern research has shown what Viking bodies knew. Feeling safe is a prerequisite for true rest. When your brain is convinced you might be attacked or abandoned at any moment, it keeps your sleep shallow. your muscles tense, your heart ready to race. When that sense of threat is reduced, not eliminated but softened, your body trusts the night enough to let go. Here, safety is not promised by locks and alarms and private walls. It is promised by proximity, by the weight of another person's leg against yours and the sound of another person's breathing in your ear. By the knowledge that, if you stop breathing in the night, someone will feel it. Warmth, in this context, becomes inseparable from belonging. To be excluded, to be banished from the communal sleeping space, is not just socially painful, it is physically dangerous. Outcasts and exiles in saga stories often face not just the violence of enemies, but the violence of exposure. The nightly pooling of shared heat is something they no longer have access to. Their punishment is not only to be unloved, but to be cold. We live now in a world that, in many places, has reversed the symbolism. Sharing a room with many people is coded as poverty. Having your own room, your own climate control, your own bed in your own locked space is coded as success. The colder it is outside, the more we expect that our individual box will protect us. Most of the time, as long as the grid holds and the boilers work, it does. But that protection is brittle. Picture a modern apartment on a winter night. The walls are reasonably insulated, perhaps. The windows are double glazed. The radiators tick as hot water runs through them. The air is a uniform 22 degrees from floor to ceiling. You walk barefoot on laminate and feel no sting. You go to bed alone in your room, under a light duvet, shirtless, because the air itself is doing the work. Then imagine the heat fails. A storm knocks out power. A boiler breaks. The building goes silent in a way you are not used to hearing. Within an hour, the radiators cool. The evenness of temperature begins to dissolve. Cold presses against the glass and bleeds in. The vast volume of air, in all your airy separate rooms, slides downward, degree by degree. If you stay alone in your bed, as if nothing has changed, you quickly learn how little insulation a single thin blanket offers when the whole environment is turning against you. You might pile on clothes, more blankets, maybe a coat. You might turn to a portable heater, if you have one, or to candles. Unless you have been unusually deliberate in how you have built your home, your safety now depends on a technology you do not control and cannot repair at 3 in the morning. In that scenario, one of the most effective things you could do is exactly what a Viking would have done without thinking: move closer to others. 4 neighbours in one room, all their blankets and coats piled together on one bed or on mattresses pushed together on the floor, can ride out a cold night much more safely than 4 people sitting shivering in their separate units. The combined heat of their bodies, the reduction of the air volume they have to warm, the shared vigilance, all recreate, in an ad hoc way, what a longhouse does by design. We have not lost the physics. We have only forgotten to build our lives around it. When you look back at the Viking longhouse with this in mind, something else becomes clear. Community, for them, was never just an abstract good. It was a piece of survival technology. Your kin group, your household, your alliances were your backup heating system. Your access to a sleeping platform in the main room was more than a matter of status. It was a guarantee that when the storms came and the night stretched long, you would not be trying to keep your core temperature up with only your own metabolism and a thin door between you and the dark. Even the way disputes are handled in saga stories reflects this. People can hate each other, feud, plot, and nurse grudges, but when winter clamps down, households consolidate. Guests are taken in, sometimes uneasily. Hospitality rules tighten. Under the same roof, lying not far from each other at night, are people who might very well try to kill each other in spring. For now, they share warmth. You, on that outer edge of the platform, might be lying next to someone you distrust, a cousin with a temper, an in-law with a sharp tongue. Your shoulders touch under the same furs. Your body cannot help but accept the heat. In the language of the body, warmth is still warmth, whatever the politics. Your survival tonight depends on that uncomfortable closeness. This is the emotional paradox of shared heat. To be warm, You must accept vulnerability. You forsake some privacy. You surrender the illusion that you can get through the season on your own. You place your body, and with it your life, in a space that is partially controlled by others. In return, you receive not just comfort but a slower rate of loss in a world that is always trying to take things from you. The Vikings leaned into this paradox because they had no choice. Their climate and technology made the costs of isolation too high. In doing so, they accidentally created living arrangements that modern science now recognizes as beneficial not just for warmth, but for mental health. Shared sleeping, shared meals, shared labour. These are the patterns that reduce loneliness, a condition now known to worsen cardiovascular health, disrupt sleep, and increase perceived cold. To feel alone in a hostile environment is to feel colder, even if the actual temperature is the same. To feel held, even in a physically chilly space, is to feel warmer. So when you imagine the Vikings' secret way to stay warm without fire, do not think only of clever walls and thick bedding. Think of the sheer, stubborn insistence on not leaving each other alone with the cold. Think of the way the Longhouse gathers people at night into a single breathing organism, its shared body heat softening the edges of winter. Think of the animals folded into that organism, their bulk and warmth woven into the fabric of the household. Think of the way a child sleeping between parents is safer than that same child in a lonely corner, and then extend that image outward until it includes a whole farm, a whole village. Warmth in numbers is not just a saying here. It is a physics lesson written in the flesh. You, lying on the outer edge of the platform, with cold pressing at your nose and warmth pressing at your spine, exist at the boundary of that lesson. Behind you, through wood and air, the soft rumble of a cow's breath. In front of you, the slow, unself-conscious heat of kin. Above you, the restless world that would gladly pull the life out of your body if you gave it enough time. Between those things stands a simple, profound arrangement. Do not face the cold alone if you can help it. Share air, share blankets, share fear, share sleep. It is not that fire does not matter. When the flames are high, when the hearth is bright, everyone feels the difference. But when the fire sinks, when the embers hide and the long night stretches, the true quiet furnace is not in the middle of the room. It is in the fact that, in this house, in this culture, one person's warmth is never allowed to stand alone against the dark. The first thing that touches the cold is not your skin. It is the wool. You step out of the Longhouse just before dawn, pushing through the heavy door, and the world outside hits you like a fist. The air is knife-sharp, full of small, hard snow that does not so much fall as hang, drifting sideways in the wind. The boards of the threshold creak under your boots. Your breath rises in white plumes that freeze in your moustache. But your core, your chest, your belly, the deep place where your heart beats, is not naked to it. There is a wall between you and the air, and that wall walks wherever you do. It is easy, looking back at Viking clothing from a distance of 1,000 years, to think in terms of outfits. A linen shirt, a wool tunic, trousers, a cloak. Maybe you picture them as costumes. The stuff of TV dramas and museums. Turn them on a hanger, admire the colours, note the cut and move on. For the people who wore them, these garments were not fashion statements or historical curiosities. They were pieces of portable architecture. The same logic that built turf walls and low roofs also built what you are wearing now. Every layer is a surface. Every fold is a windbreak. Every pocket of air between fibres is a room you carry around your body where the cold has to fight uphill to get in. Under your cloak, closest to your skin, is your under tunic. Linen if you are lucky, coarse wool if you are not. It is not thick. Its job is not to keep you warm. It is to keep you dry. It drinks sweat away from your skin and passes it outward. Over that rests a heavier woolen tunic, perhaps another, if the day demands it, dropping to mid-thigh. Around your legs run wool trousers or hose wrapped and bound with strips of cloth at the calves to keep everything snug. Your feet are swaddled in foot wraps, then leather shoes. Over all of this hangs your cloak, a great piece of dense wool, pinned at one shoulder so that it drapes around you like a one-person tent. From the outside, you look composed, maybe even imposing. Inside those layers, a quiet, constant battle is being fought with the air. Every layer you add does two things. It slows wind and it traps air. Wind is the great thief. Standing in still, cold air, you can actually tolerate lower temperatures than you think, because the warmth your body gives off can pool around you for a moment before drifting away. Add wind, and that thin layer is stripped off your skin again and again. It is like someone repeatedly dipping you in cold water. No fabric is truly warm if the wind is allowed to slice through it. So Viking clothing is built to break the wind's path into a maze. The tunic, trousers, and cloak all overlap at different angles. The hem of your tunic covers the top of your trousers. The cloak falls over both. Leg wraps crisscross around your calves and shins, breaking up those long, straight channels where wind loves to travel. Nothing is perfectly sealed. This is not modern waterproof gear with taped seams, but every layer forces air to take a more tortuous route if it wants to reach your skin. At the same time, those layers trap the very thing the cold is trying to steal. Your own warm breath, seeping out through your skin. Between the tunic and cloak, between the cloak and the world, between wool trousers and leg wraps, there are countless tiny chambers. Most of them are not visible. They exist in the thickness of the fabric itself. Wool, especially the kind used in Viking Age clothing, is not a smooth sheet. Each fibre is crimped, curled like a microscopic spring. When you spin those fibres into yarn and weave them, that crimp doesn't vanish. It holds the threads apart just enough to create a forest of little hollows. Air slips into those hollows and stays. It is the same principle that makes the Viking bed work. Still air is good air. Air that does not move cannot quickly carry heat away. Under your cloak, in your sleeves, along your torso, the air touching your under tunic warms by a degree, then another, then another. As your body quietly donates energy to it, the wool around that air traps it and forces any new, colder air to fight its way through 1,000 twists and turns. This is why, if you have ever worn good wool on a cold day, there is a moment when the garment stops feeling like a foreign object and starts feeling like an extension of you. At first, when you leave the house, everything is simply cold. The wool feels rough, inert. Then, given a few minutes of walking, your own heat animates it. You begin to sense a buffer, cold at the fingers, at the tip of your nose, but warmth gathering under your chest, along your sides, at your lower back. For a Viking, that feeling was not a bonus. That was the point. We love to talk today about how some modern fabrics wick moisture or breathe. In the Viking world, wool was the miracle material that did all of that without anyone needing to explain it. Sheep did the work. Their wool evolved to do exactly what you're asking it to do now. Keep a living body warm in wind and wet and snow. The crimp in each fibre creates those precious air pockets. The structure of the fibre itself absorbs some moisture without losing its spring. Even damp wool keeps on insulating. It can take on water slowly in its inner structure, while its outer surfaces still hold dry air. It also carries natural lanolin, an oil that helps shed water and adds a degree of wind resistance. When the Vikings sheared their sheep, spun the fibres, woven them into cloth, they were harvesting an animal's lifetime of adaptation and turning it into human shelter. They did not need a textile engineer to tell them wool was special. They had hands. They knew how a linen shirt clung cold and clammy if you sweated in it and then stood in the wind, the water sitting against your skin, pulling heat out of you. They knew how wool, even when damp, still felt strangely warm and forgiving, its fibres holding your own heat near your body instead of handing it to the air. They knew that a young child in woolen layers fared better in sleep than one in linen alone, so they built their wardrobes around it. When you pull your cloak tighter against the sea wind, feel its weight drag on your shoulder where the brooch pins it, you are feeling centuries of observation in woven form. The cloak is not an accessory, it is a wall. a movable, personal, adaptable wall that can be a blanket at night, a sail against rain, a windbreak on a long ride, a makeshift tent in an emergency. Now take that wall aboard a ship. The horizon is a dirty grey line in every direction. The fjord opened into the ocean 2 days ago, and since then the world has been a shifting plain of still water and low, fast-moving clouds. The longship rises and falls, its planks creaking, oars biting in rhythm. You sit on your rowing bench, knees braced, boots wet. Salt spray flicks up over the gunwale and freezes in crusts on the rails. There is no fire. You are surrounded by wood, tar, cloth and pitch, things that burn far too well to tolerate sparks. If you went out here in nothing but a thin tunic and the idea that you would tough it out, you would be courting death. The cold is not a dramatic blast, it is an endless creeping demand, made worse by wet. Every splash against your legs, every bit of spray that lands on your chest or hood, carries away more of your heat as it evaporates. Yet under your cloak your core is holding. The cloak is drawn forward over your knees, tucked tight along the side of the boat, turned into a kind of hemisphere of wool around your upper body. Your arms move inside it as much as possible, hands hidden in the fold where fabric doubles back. Your breath fills that small space with humidity and warmth. Your underlayers wick away sweat from the work of rowing and send it outward, where the moving air can take it away through the outer wool instead of letting it sit against your ribs. Your thighs ache with effort. Your fingers, when exposed to grip the oar, sting and go numb and come back. Your face is raw, the skin across your cheekbones feeling like stretched bark. But inside that bubble of layered cloth and trapped air, the temperature is several degrees kinder than whatever the sky has decided to be. Your heart beats in that shelter. Your lungs pull air that, while cold, has been slightly warmed and moistened by its time trapped under the edges of your cloak. No one on this ship thinks of a cloak as outerwear in the modern sense. It is more like a small wearable room. At night, if you beach somewhere half-sheltered and drag the ship above the tide line, it becomes a house within a house. You lay down bracken or straw under your body, wrap your cloak around you, and pull its hood over your head. Sleep comes in something very much like the environment of the Longhouse bed, only smaller and more exposed. The same physics apply. Wool plus air plus flesh equals a quiet, stubborn pocket of warmth in a world that has none to spare. Viking clothing focuses on the core, because the core is what must not fail. Your fingers can hurt, they can be damaged. In extreme cases, you can even lose them and live. Your toes can freeze and blacken and still leave you a heartbeat. But if the temperature of your liver, your heart, your brain drifts too far downward, the game is over. So everything, from the cut of your garments to the way you fasten them, is oriented toward keeping your torso's heat loss as low as possible. That is why the neckline of your tunic is high and the opening small, why you might wrap a scarf or an extra strip of cloth around your throat and tuck it into your collar, why your belt sits snug, closing off gaps where wind could slide up under your clothes and strip your belly of warmth. The chest, the lower back, the belly, these are walled and re-walled with fabric. Extremities are not forgotten. They get their own micro-shelters. On your head you wear a cap or hood, simple enough. But look closely at a well-made one and you see cleverness. It fits close to your skull. No point letting air move freely there. But it extends downward, covering your ears and the back of your neck. In colder regions, it might have fur along the edge, not just for decoration, but to create a thicker barrier where skin is thinnest. Fur at the edge of a hood does something subtle. As your warm breath rises, it hits that ring of hair. The fur disrupts the airflow, slowing the speed at which your breath escapes. Some of it is deflected back toward your face. In modern parkas with fur ruffs, this effect can mean the difference between frozen cheeks and bearable cold. Vikings did not have the language of fluid dynamics, but they had eyes and cheeks, and enough winters to figure out that certain arrangements of fur made the wind less cruel. On your hands, mittens beat gloves almost every time. Separate fingers, each in its own little sleeve of fabric, present more surface area to the cold. Air can creep between them. Heat bleeds out. Along each digit, individually. A mitten, even a simple woolen one, lets your fingers huddle. They share warmth like bodies on the sleeping platform. A windproof outer layer, leather in many cases, over a wool mitten creates yet another dual system. Wool traps heat. Leather stops the wind and sheds water. Leg wraps, so fiddly to modern eyes, serve the same double purpose. Wind loves to travel up the long, hollow tunnel of a trouser leg. Wrap that leg snugly in spiral bands of wool or linen, and you break that tunnel into short overlapping segments. Each turn of the wrap creates friction, pressing the underlying fabric closer to the skin, closing gaps where heat could leak out. At the same time, the slight thickness of the wrap adds more air-holding capacity. Your calves and shins, which play host to big, important blood vessels on their way to and from your feet, become less vulnerable. Even your feet, trapped in always damp shoes, get their version of the principle. Undersocks or foot wraps of wool, changed often when possible, give sweat somewhere to go and provide insulation even when moist. Stuffing extra dry grass or wool into your shoes can create another layer of air and fibre between you and the soaking leather. If you dry those materials by the fire and refresh them daily, your feet might not be comfortable, but they will be less likely to slide over that invisible line where cold and miserable becomes numb and in danger. All of this can sound in a warm room like overthinking, but when you live in a climate where the outside air regularly dips below freezing and the wind never really stops, clothing choices become the difference between life and death long before they become style. And that is where Viking thinking about clothing diverges from much of modern fashion. We, especially in temperate urban places, are used to dressing for a journey between heated spaces. From home to car, car to office, office to shop, shop to home. The coldest parts of our day are often brief, and we tolerate discomfort in those in-between moments for the sake of looking a certain way in the warm. Thin jackets, exposed ankles, stylish shoes that ignore what water does when it meets fabric. Our clothing works in partnership with centralized heating. When the systems fail, its weaknesses are exposed. A cotton hoodie that feels fine indoors becomes a cold sponge in sleet. Jeans soaked through cling and rob heat. We feel personally betrayed, as if the weather has broken the rules. The Vikings had no such illusions. There were heated spaces, the Longhouse, the bathhouse, in some towns the hall, but they did not assume the world would cushion the time between them. The cloak on your shoulders had to be enough on its own. The wind would not care whether you looked good. So their clothing philosophy began from a different question. Not how can I feel warm, but how can I avoid losing heat faster than I can afford? It is a small shift in words, but an enormous shift in mindset. Feeling warm is a transient sensation. You can feel warm standing right next to a roaring fire, basking in its radiant heat. Take 2 steps back, or have someone block the flames for a moment, and the feeling vanishes, because the underlying conditions have not changed. You are still exposed. The heat never really belonged to you. Not losing heat is quieter. It doesn't always feel dramatic. In fact, good cold weather clothing often means you never feel particularly toasty. You feel neutral. The cold is there, but it is something pressing at your boundaries rather than pouring in. You are not overheating, not sweating heavily, not drying out. You are simply okay. Vikings aimed for okay. Their garments allowed for adjustment when needed. Unpin the cloak when rowing hard. Throw back the hood when working with your hands near the fire. Loosen the belt after a heavy meal. They accepted that some parts of the body would be cold. Hands, face, the tip of the nose. They could sting and burn and numb and recover. Those sensations were part of life, not aberrations, to be banished at any cost. The cost they refused to pay was letting cold reach the core unnoticed. If you came in from outside and felt a deep chill along your spine that would not go away, someone noticed. More layers, a seat by the fire, hot food. If a child's hands were chapped and red, that was unfortunate. If their lips were pale and their breath shallow, that was an alarm. Everything about the clothing system supported that triage. Protect the center, accept manageable discomfort at the edge. In doing so, Vikings turned their bodies into walking hearths. Not flashy, open flame hearths, like a bonfire, but banked ones, embers under ash, slow burning, hard to extinguish. The wool and linen and leather they wore were the stones and bricks around that fire, the hood over it, the narrow flue that let smoke out without letting all the heat escape. We love the image of a Viking silhouetted against a blazing hall, cloak snapping in the wind, torch in hand. But most of the work of staying alive in that world happened in much humbler ways, in the choice to wear one more layer, to patch a cloak instead of letting a hole grow, to wrap a leg tightly instead of leaving it bare. If you strip away the romance and look at the system, what you see is a people who understood that warmth was not a gift but a responsibility. You eat to keep the fire inside you burning. You move to stir the embers. You build your house to shelter it at night. You build your clothes to shelter it when you step out into a universe that sees no difference between you and the stone you stand on. There is a kind of comfort in that clarity. Step now, in your mind, back onto that longship. The sea is black under the stars. The oars move. Your hands ache. Your toes are damp. You adjust the fold of your cloak and feel the air under it, no longer the same air that slashes at your cheeks. It belongs to you now, warmed and softened, moving to your rhythm. There is no fire on the deck. There cannot be. Yet you carry one with you all the same, not in your hand, under your ribs, wrapped in wool and hidden air. The fire in the hearth has gone low again, but your stomach is still burning, not with pain, with something heavier and slower. You can feel it as you lean back from the table, the wooden spoon loose in your hand, your belly pleasantly full. A moment ago, before the food, the cold had teeth. It bit at your fingers, crept along your spine whenever you moved away from the fire's direct glow. Now, as you sit and breathe, something in you pushes back. It starts somewhere deep, behind the ribs, under the breastbone. A spreading warmth that is different from the sharp, superficial heat of the flames. It doesn't flare. It doesn't spike. It radiates like a coal that has been covered and left to do its work out of sight. Outside, the wind claws at the Longhouse walls. You can hear it in the pauses between words. A low, hungry sound. Snow rattles against the turf and timber. The door shudders in its frame, but for the first time since you woke in the grey of morning, you do not feel as if that wind could simply reach through the wall and take what it wants from your body. Because the real fire keeping you alive tonight is not the one in the middle of the room. It is the one under your skin. On the table in front of you are the remains of a meal that would horrify a modern diet guru and delight a Viking. The pot that hung over the hearth is scraped nearly clean, but you can still see the shine of fat on the inside. It held porridge, not the thin, watery stuff of famine stories, but a dense mash of barley or oats boiled in whey or milk, thick enough that the spoon could stand upright for a moment before sinking. Into that went chunks of fish from the barrels near the door, soft from curing, their rich flesh breaking apart with barely a touch. There was butter too, stirred in at the last moment by a knowing hand until the porridge turned glossy and heavy and perfumed the air with that unmistakable, mouth-coating smell. You ate until the chill in your hands retreated and the skin of your face tingled with the effort of digestion. The children did the same, slower, making faces at the taste of strong fish one moment and licking the spoon the next. An older relative kept adding to their bowls with a motion that said, without words, more now, while we have it. While the barrels are full and the animals still stand, this is not indulgence, it is strategy. Fatty fish, meat from slaughtered animals, thick dairy. These are not luxuries in a northern winter. They're fuel, chosen and prepared in ways that turn your own body into a furnace that burns long after the fire dies. If you could see that furnace, it would not look like the dramatic flames in the hearth. It would look more like 1,000 tiny lamps burning throughout your tissues. Every cell in your body needs energy to move, to repair, to keep you warm. Food is the fuel you pour into that system, the kind of fuel you choose, and when you pour it, changes how your inner fire behaves. The Viking diet, for much of the year, and especially in the cold months, is heavy on what we now call slow-burning fuel. Fish hauled from the sea and river, fatty cuts of meat from pigs, cattle, sheep, offal, liver, heart, kidneys, boiled into stews or fried in pans, butter and tallow, worked into porridge, smeared on bread, melted over greens, skyr and other fermented dairy, thick enough to stand on its own. Even when grains and roots bulk out a meal, they usually share the bowl with something oily, something that leaves a sheen on your lips. To a modern eye trained to flinch at fat, this might look reckless. To someone dragging sledges through snow, rowing against icy waves, hauling nets, chopping wood, mending nets with stiff fingers, it looks sensible. Sugar and fine white bread give quick flashes of energy, and just as quick crashes. There is almost no place for them here. What you need is something that will keep dripping heat into your system hour after hour, long after the bowl is empty. Protein does part of that work. Meat and fish are made of the same stuff your muscles are, amino acids that your body must break apart and rebuild. That building process is expensive. It generates heat as a byproduct, what we would now call the thermic effect of food. Eat a bowl of pure fat or sugar, and your body sets it aside easily, like stacking logs or pouring oil. Eat a slab of meat and your stomach and liver and other organs light up like a workshop full of workers suddenly handed a complicated, heavy task. They burn extra energy just to process what you've taken in, and you feel that effort as warmth. Fat does the rest. Unlike sugar, which hits fast and leaves fast, fat moves slowly. It is dense. A small amount carries a great deal of potential energy. When you eat it, your body can choose. Burn some now, tuck some away in storage as body fat for later. Either way, the process is not subtle. Blood vessels in your core widen to handle the work. Your heart beats a little stronger. The slightly flushed feeling in your chest after a heavy meal, the way your eyelids grow heavy, but you feel oddly cozy. This is your internal fire being fed and then leaning into its work. The Vikings may not know the words for enzymes, mitochondria, or thermogenesis. They know, however, that after a meal like this, the Longhouse feels different. People talk lower, movement slow. Someone pokes the fire, now modest, and judges that it does not need much more fuel tonight. Bodies are doing more of the work now. Meal timing matters. You do not eat the heaviest things just before stepping into the fields or taking up the oars. A belly overfull at the wrong time makes work clumsy and dangerous. The day's pattern tends to concentrate the richest, fattiest foods in the later meal, while there is still time before bed for digestion to begin, but not so much time that all the heat and energy are spent on physical labour. You eat, you move a bit, cleaning, small tasks, evening chores, and then you lie down in the system you and your household have built: bed, clothing, house, animals, people. Now all those layers start to work with what you have just put into your stomach. Digestion is not just about breaking food into parts. It is a transformation. With each wave of muscle in your gut, each squeeze of your gallbladder, each enzyme released, energy changes form, from the tight bonds in fat and protein to the looser, more immediate form your cells can use. Heat is the constant side effect. Your core temperature rises slightly as your body burns the fuel and redistributes its components. The blankets over you trap some of that extra warmth. So does the wool tunic you forgot to take off in your drowsiness. What could have been waste heat lost to the room becomes part of the microclimate under your covers. If you've ever eaten a heavy meal on a winter evening and then lain on a couch, feeling both sleepy and oddly hot in your middle, you already know this effect. The Vikings simply built their days so that this nightly internal fire was not wasted. They were, without knowing it, running a long, continuous experiment in what modern scientists would call metabolic adaptation. Their environment demanded that they use food as more than just fuel for movement. It had to be fuel for heat. Summers in many parts of the north could be mild, even pleasant. There was green grass, long days, berries, fish in abundance. But winter was a long ambush. The gap between what the body needed and what the sun provided was too wide to bridge with clothing and walls alone. So the year turned into a rhythm of feeding the future. In autumn, before the worst cold, animals were slaughtered. Herds could not be kept at full size through the winter. There was not enough fodder. Meat was salted, dried, smoked, buried in vats and pits. Fat was rendered and stored, sealed in containers that kept out air, or soaked into the meat itself through curing. Fish were caught in staggering numbers and treated the same way. The goal was twofold: prevent starvation and keep bodies rich in the kind of fuel that burns slowly in the cold. Those bodies included your own. We like now to idealize a certain look: lean, cut, all muscle lines and taut skin. We assume, without thinking, that a healthy Viking must have looked like a modern athlete in perpetual competition shape. But the people who actually lived this life knew better. Body fat, in their world, was not an aesthetic flaw. It was an asset. Not to the point of immobility. You still had to work, to carry, to fight. But a certain softness under the skin, a certain thickness around the waist and hips, meant your body had a buffer. Fat does two things exceptionally well. It stores energy and it insulates. As storage, it keeps you alive during the hungry stretches, the late winter weeks, when barrels run low and the fish have not yet returned in earnest. The hungry gap, when last year's harvest is gone and the new shoots are not yet food. When you eat less, your body quietly switches to burning the fat it stored when times were better. That process, pulling energy out of fat cells and burning it, creates heat. As insulation, fat slows the speed at which you lose that heat. If you have ever stood next to someone on a cold day and noticed that, at the same air temperature, they shiver while you feel steady, or vice versa, you have felt the effect. A body with a bit more fat under the skin, especially over the organs, loses less heat into the environment. It is like having a bit of extra wool built in. In the north, this is not theory, it is survival. A person on the lean edge, all stringy muscle, might be admired for strength in the moment. But if famine comes, if illness strikes, if the winter is longer and harsher than expected, they have no cushion. A person with some stored fat can endure a surprising number of bad weeks before their inner fire runs truly low. The Vikings did not hold calipers to measure body composition. Their understanding was simpler and sharper. People who kept weight on through winter tended to still be alive in spring. Their children, when well fed, carried that lesson in their very tissues, in another way too, through something we now call brown fat. Most of the fat in an adult body is white, pale, soft storage tissue, whose main function is to hold energy until needed. But there is another kind more common in infants and in people exposed to chronic cold that behaves differently. Brown fat is packed not just with stored energy, but with tiny cellular engines that can turn fuel directly into heat. It is most abundant in the upper back and neck, near blood vessels that can carry warmth quickly to the brain and heart. When activated by certain hormonal signals, it doesn't just drip out energy slowly, it flares like a cluster of little fires, raising your core temperature without you moving a muscle. The Vikings, shivering on decks or trudging through snow in childhood, sleeping in chilly rooms, were unconsciously training this tissue. Regular cold exposure, combined with high-calorie diets, when food was available, encouraged their bodies to keep brown fat active. Children raised in these conditions would have had an easier time raising their own heat on demand than children who never felt true cold. They didn't know the name of the tissue, but they knew the pattern. Some people, they noticed, ran hot. They could work in lighter clothes, they flushed quickly, they steamed in winter air. Others ran cold, shivered more, needed more layers. Over time, with repeated seasons, the bodies of the survivors drifted toward life in which cold was something to be handled from within as much as from without. You can feel that legacy in your own bones on a night like this. Later, when the bowls have been stacked and the last greasy scrap licked from a child's fingers, and the animals checked, you climb onto the sleeping platform, just as you did every night in chapters before. The longhouse is dim. The fire is now only embers, covered to make them last. Wool and fur wrap your body. Other bodies press against your sides. And under all of that, the meal you ate begins the second half of its journey. Your stomach churns slowly, rhythmic. Muscles in your intestinal walls squeeze and relax, squeezing the softened mass along. Blood flow to your gut increases. Other processes slow down. The same nervous system that hours before had been sending signals to make your muscles lift and dig and carry is now shifting into another mode. Digest, absorb, store, burn. If you could tune into your liver as you drift towards sleep, you would hear the busiest workshop in your body. Fatty acids arriving in waves, sorted and tagged, some bundled into droplets and shipped off to fat cells for storage, some burned right there for current energy needs. The heat from that burning doesn't vanish, it enters your blood. That blood flows under the wool at your chest, brushes past skin, where it can give up some of that heat, then dives deeper again. Some of the fuel goes to consciousness, keeping the slow embers of your mind glowing in dreams. Some go to musculature, repairing tiny tears from the day's labour. Some go to immune cells, constantly patrolling for invaders. The Viking body, like any human body, is a negotiation between these demands. In winter, a new priority sits near the top of the list. Don't let the temperature of this system fall below the point where these negotiations can continue. Everything you've seen so far in this story supports that priority. The house slows heat loss. The bed and blankets slow it more. The clothing you'll put on in the morning slows it out there in the field and on the sea. The community shares the burden, so no one's fire has to do all the work. And under it all, the food, the fat, the timing of meals keep feeding the fire from the inside, so you don't have to rely solely on whatever heat trickles in from the environment. We tend now to think of metabolism only in terms of weight, fast or slow, good or bad, something to speed up or calm down. In the Viking world, before all the theories and fads, metabolism is simply life. It is the hum of the inner forge. You feel it as hunger when the fuel gets low. You feel it as warmth when it's being fed. You feel it as weakness when it is starving. You feel it as a particular, satisfying heaviness in your limbs and chest when you've given it exactly what it needs, on a night when the world outside would rather you stop existing. It is no accident that so many feasts in northern stories are set in winter. The storytellers know that the sight of a hall packed with people eating meat off the bone, drinking fat-laced broths, tearing soft bread and smearing it with butter, resonates in a place where the memory of hunger is never far away. But those feasts are not only spectacles of plenty, they are rituals of stoking the collective fire. You can imagine, if you like, one such evening, not in a king's hall, but in an ordinary farmstead. The day has been spent breaking ice from water troughs, cutting branches for fodder, mending a fishing net near the doorway where light is best. The wind has been up. You've been resigned to feeling mildly chilled from dawn to dusk, hands and cheeks never fully warm. Then in the low light of afternoon, the bigger pot goes on. Fatty bits saved from a slaughter, bones with cartilage still clinging, scraps of dried fish, root vegetables from the cellar, all go in together. Hours pass, the smell thickens the air. When you finally sit and eat, each spoonful feels like laying a log on the fire inside you. By the time you lick the bowl and push back from the table, something fundamental has changed. Your hands aren't just not cold, they are positively hot on the inside, even if the skin still feels cool. Your back, which ached with a deep, icy fatigue, now feels simply tired. The air in the longhouse hasn't changed much. You can see your breath in it if you huff, but the way that air feels against your face has shifted, because the gradient between your core and the world has grown steeper. You have more to give up. You can afford to lose a little. You have, in a very real sense, turned yourself into a walking stove. The Vikings did this without charts, without calorie counts, without macros. They did it by listening to bodies in an unforgiving environment. Meals heavy on fat and protein in the cold months. Meals that start earlier, so the peak of the metabolic fire lines up with the onset of the longest, coldest stretch of the night. Bodies allowed, encouraged, to carry enough fat to bridge the lean times. Children raised in a way that keeps their inner furnaces responsive. It is tempting to romanticize this, to say that they were stronger or hardier. In some ways they were, in others they were simply more honest about what a human animal has to do to stay warm where the world does not want it. They did not have the option to pretend that food was just about taste or looks or numbers scrawled on paper. In winter, every bite had a shadow. Will this help me burn through the night? Tonight, as the Longhouse quiets and your eyes slide shut, that question has been answered well. You feel it in the way you do not curl up as tightly as you did the night before a poor meal, in the way your shoulders unclench. In this way, sleep comes not like collapse, but like a gentle hand over your eyes. Outside, beyond turf and timber and cloak and skin, the cold keeps pressing in. Inside, deep in your chest and belly, the coals glow on, fed by fish and porridge and fat and the quiet, relentless work of your own cells. The hearth can go dark. The storm can cut off fuel. The night can last 16 hours. But as long as there is food, as long as your body can keep turning that food into heat, as long as you treat that process not as an afterthought, but as the central fire of your life, you carry the most important warmth with you, wherever you lie down. The Vikings, without formulas or thermometers, understood that. They built their lives around it. The cold does not ask your permission. It does not negotiate. It simply arrives. It presses through the cracks in the Longhouse door before dawn. It lies in the water that has skinned itself with ice overnight. It comes down from the hills in low, invisible waves that turn your breath into steam and your fingers into stiff, clumsy tools. You feel it first when you shift under the blankets, and your nose leaves the little cave of warm air you made while you slept. For a moment, between the warmth of the bed and the promise of the fire, you hover. In a modern house, this might be the place where you reach for a switch. Turn, wait. Expect the air itself to change while you do nothing. In the Viking world, there is no such option. The air does not care about your wishes. The only thing that will change quickly, reliably, is you. So the cold is not a condition to complain about. It is a command. Move. You throw back the covers, and the air bites at your skin, but you are already swinging your feet down. The shock of the cold floor sends a sharp message up your legs. Blood vessels in your skin clamp down to protect the core. For a second, your whole body wants to shrink away from the world. You step anyway. Around you, other figures are doing the same. No one lies in bed grumbling about the temperature. There are animals outside that need water and feed before the sun has really admitted its morning. There is a fire that needs coaxing from embers to flame. There are buckets to fill, ice to break, tools to fetch. The day will not wait for you to feel ready. You pull on your clothes in quick, practiced motions, under tunic, wool, trousers, wraps, cloak. The wool is cool at first, but you know it will change. It always does. You pin your cloak, jam your cap over your hair, and duck through the low doorway. The first breath outside is always the worst. It feels as if the air itself has teeth. It scrapes your throat, makes your eyes water, stabs at the exposed skin around your eyes. The yard is a hard, pale world, snow trampled and refrozen into uneven ridges. The trough by the byre is a grey slab under a skin of cloudy ice. Your fingers ache just looking at it. And then you pick up the axe. The handle is familiar in your palm, the wood polished by the hands of many winters. Your muscles know what comes next. You lift, swing, and let the weight of the head crash down. The ice cracks, jumps, explodes into jagged pieces. Cold water breathes up at you, a dark, moving thing under the dead surface. You swing again and again, breath coming faster now, shoulders warming. At first, each movement feels as if you are pushing through something heavy. Your joints resent being asked to work in this temperature. Your back complains. But within a minute, maybe two, your body starts to answer the cold's challenge in the only way it knows how, by burning more fuel to drive your muscles. Every contraction is a tiny fire. The act of lifting and dropping that axe converts chemical energy from last night's meal into force. Your muscles do not do this silently. They leak heat. Blood flowing through them picks up that extra warmth and carries it back toward your core. Your heart, beating faster to keep up with the work, sends that warmed blood out again. In the time it takes to open a trough, you have started the great pump that will keep you alive for another freezing day. The animals watch you, steam rising from their nostrils. Their bodies generate heat too, Chapter 4's shared radiators, but they cannot break their own ice. That is on you. So, you move. Draw water, haul feed, drag hay. Each task that modern life might frame as a burden is here also therapy. The more you do, within reason, the sooner your body shifts from victim of the cold to engine under load. You feel it in a wave. Your fingers stop feeling like separate alien objects and begin to rejoin the rest of your body. Your feet, stamping and bracing in the snow, send back faint pulses of warmth. Your chest feels less as if it's collapsing inward, and more as if something is swelling gently under your ribs with each breath. By the time you turn back toward the house, your face is numb, but your shirt is damp under your cloak. The Longhouse door, which looked so forbidding when you stepped out, now looks like the gateway to almost indecent comfort. You duck inside and are hit by air that, an hour ago, felt cold. Now it feels warm. Nothing magical has happened in the meantime. The fire is still modest, a low orange bed with a few flames licking at the underside of an iron pot. The walls are still turf and timber. The smoke layer still hangs grumpy and grey near the rafters. The objective temperature in here has not changed by more than a nudge. But you have changed. Your body is running hotter. Your blood vessels in your skin are still somewhat closed, keeping that heat near your organs. When that warmer blood meets the slightly warmer room air, the contrast is suddenly, powerfully, in your favour. You take a breath, and it does not sting. You take off your cloak, and do not immediately shiver. The Longhouse feels in that moment like a refuge, not because it is a tropical paradise, but because you have become your own fireplace. This pattern repeats all day. There is no version of Viking, of life where you sit by the fire and complain at length about the cold. The fire is there to cook, to light, to help dry clothes and bedding and bodies. It is not there to do all the work of keeping your temperature up while you remain still. Stillness in this world is expensive. If you spend an hour seated by the hearth, doing nothing with your muscles, you can feel yourself cooling. The slow warmth that meandered through you after morning chores gradually dissipates. You inch closer to the flames, chasing that lost feeling. You turn, toast one side, then the other, like bread. The moment you step away, the air feels vicious again. Everyone around you has learned this lesson the hard way, perhaps in childhood, perhaps in the memory of an elder who didn't get up enough last winter and never quite recovered. So the rhythm of the day is built to deny you the opportunity to sit still for long. Farming does not let you. There is fencing to repair, even in winter, posts to check, tools to mend. In the warmer months there is sowing, weeding, harvesting, threshing, all of it physical, all of it involving lifting, bending, walking. Herding does not let you. Animals need to be moved, watched, retrieved. Shipbuilding does not let you. Shaping a plank with an axe, driving pegs, dragging timbers, all require strength. Even work that looks, on the surface, like sitting down, is rarely truly sedentary. Mending nets means constant small movements of hands and forearms, muscles firing over and over. Spinning wool is a steady dance of fingers, wrists, elbows. Carving wood sends little flares of effort through your shoulders and back. You are not leaping and running, but you are not idle either. Your inner fire is kept just above a simmer. And then there are the deliberate bursts. As afternoon skews toward evening and the light bleeds out of the sky, the cold sharpens again. This is when, in many households, the heaviest tasks of the day line up in a narrow window before full dark. Someone has to bring in the last of the firewood from outside. The logs are frozen, heavier than they feel in summer. You carry 2, 3 at a time, arms straining, cloak flapping. Someone else has to check the fences one more time, make sure no drift or fallen branch has opened a gap for animals to escape. It's a quick walk maybe, but at a pace that keeps the heart pumping. Water for the night must be brought in. Snow for melting, if you're far from a stream, has to be hauled. Each of these tasks is both a practical necessity and an unconscious warm-up routine. By the time you finish them and step back inside, your muscles are humming with the residue of work. Your lungs have been working hard enough that your breath has become its own little stove in your chest. When you strip off outer layers and sit down to the evening meal, you are a different creature than you were at midday, when your energy dipped and the chill muted your movements. There is a particular feeling you only get after this cycle. Imagine, it's dusk. You've been out in the yard, up to your knees in snow, hauling hay to the animals. Your boots are crusted, your socks are damp. The wind found its way under your cloak a few times and stabbed at the sweat cooling on your back. Your thighs shook on the last trip, a good kind of fatigue. Your breath came sharp and loud in the still air. For a moment, standing there, with the last armful of hay, you felt the cold trying to sink all the way into you. Then you finished. You turned. You trudged back across the yard, each step a heavy, satisfying thud. You opened the Longhouse door and were hit with that rush of air that this time felt almost hot. It isn't, not really. But compared to the world you've just been in, it might as well be. Your skin prickles as the blood vessels at the surface begin, tentatively, to open. Your fingers itch as feeling pours back in. Your shoulders relax in increments. When you finally sit down, the bench under you feels not like a cold plank, but like the edge of a hearth. The residual heat from your own exertion flares against the relative gentleness of the indoor air. If you've ever come in from shoveling snow into a mildly heated house, stripping off layers and suddenly feeling almost too warm, you know this sensation. The Vikings simply lived in a way that produced it multiple times a day. This is not to say that they never suffered, or that movement made them invincible. Frostbite, hypothermia, exhaustion, these were all real dangers. You could push too far. You could get wet and not be able to move enough to compensate. Illness could pin you down and leave you vulnerable to the cold, even by the hearth. Old age could slow you until your inner fire couldn't answer the cold's demands, as well as it once did. But the baseline expectation was clear. As long as you can move, move. If you stand at a fjord's edge in early spring, watching a crew of rowers push off, you see the same principle on the water. There is no fire on a longship deck. There is almost nothing between you and whatever the sky has decided to do that day. The wind over the water is sharp, cutting through wool and cloak if given the chance. Spray leaps and freezes on the gunnels. Feet are wet more often than not. You cannot change the air. You cannot light a comforting blaze in the middle of a tarred boat, so you change your relationship to the air. The rhythm of the oars becomes a kind of spell. Heave, pull, release. Again, again. The initial part of the journey is miserable, a period where the cold has the advantage and every stroke feels like an insult. Then the deep muscles in your back and legs and shoulders join the fight in earnest. Heat blooms under your ribs, crawls up your neck. Beads sweat along your hairline despite the wind. Row long enough and you begin to produce so much heat that you must actively vent it. Cloaks go looser, hoods are pushed back despite the weather. Some men end up stripped down to their under-tunics, arms shining with effort, steam rising from their bodies like the ship itself is exhaling. They are, in a very literal, physical sense, creating summer around their own cause while winter still owns the world. But there is a cost. The moment they stop, when the boat beaches or the rowing schooner ends, the cold rushes back. Pause too long, stay seated in damp clothes on a motionless deck, and you can feel the warmth draining away like water from a broken cask. So they do not linger. They jump to tasks, dragging the ship up the shore, unloading cargo, scouting a landing. Feet move, hands pull and lift and tie. All of it the same answer to the same question, over and over. The cold is here. What will you do with it? This mindset starts early. A Viking child in winter is not wrapped in delicate cotton and told to sit by the fire all day. They might not be sent out into the teeth of every storm, but on bearable days they run in the yard, chase each other between outbuildings, stumble after adults on short errands. Their games involve wrestling, climbing and dragging things. They get cold, they get warm again. Their bodies learn, wordlessly, that heat can be made as well as lost. In doing so, they build not just muscle, but habits. And habit is perhaps the deepest part of this whole system. To a modern person, used to treating the cold as a personal affront, the first instinct when the air bites is stillness. Curl up, wrap your arms around yourself. Complain. Maybe reach for a thermostat or a heavier blanket. Movement is framed as exercise, something you schedule and sometimes avoid. To a Viking, stillness is what you get when you're sick or at table or in the last minutes before sleep. It is not the default response to discomfort. If your fingers hurt, you flex them. If your feet are numb, you stamp them. If your back feels cold, you get up and do something that makes you bend it. The cold is not a problem to be solved by the environment. It is a prompt from the environment to change your own state. This doesn't mean that anyone is cheerful about it all the time. There are curses muttered against wind and ice, teeth clenched when stepping into sleet, but the underlying assumption is different. Cold is information, not insult. It tells you that your current way of existing will not be sustainable if you keep it up. So you alter it. You see this even in the middle of the night. Remember the biphasic sleep pattern from earlier chapters. The waking between first and second sleep. You rise in the dark, not fully, but enough to tend to something. The fire, the animals, your own bladder. In that short, shivery interval, you could sit hunched by the embers and complain. Instead, you do a few small tasks. Add wood to the hearth, step outside to check the weather, walk the length of the house to make sure all is well. By the time you crawl back under the blankets, that brief bother has served two purposes. The house is safer, and your body has reawakened a faint glow of warmth from the movement. You slide into the bed, not as a lump of chilled flesh, but as a slightly warmed thing that can reheat its nest more quickly. Contrast this with the modern picture. Waking in the night, lying still scrolling a glowing screen, body unmoved, mind overstimulated, room temperature unchanged by your inaction. One relationship to discomfort feeds back into more vulnerability. The other, awkward but effective, feeds into resilience. None of this is heroic. It is simply necessary. The longhouse, the bedding, the clothing, the food, all of those systems buy you time and reduce the slope of the hill you have to climb each day to stay warm. Movement is how you actually climb it. If you could list the hours you spend in a winter week, you would see huge blocks of time devoted to work that in another climate might be done more leisurely or with more assistance from tools. But here, the inefficiency of muscle power is a feature, not a bug. Every time your arms and legs and back have to do something themselves, they pay you in heat. You do not go to a gym in the evening to get your exercise. Your life is the gym. Cold weather is not the excuse to skip it. It is the reason it matters. You walk more because there are fewer choices. You carry things further because there are no engines to do it for you. You chop wood by hand. You haul water. You wrestle with frozen doors and heavy cloaks and reluctant animals. Each task drags along behind it, a wake of warmth, small but real. In our world now, we have mostly arranged things so that we never have to move if we don't want to. Food can be brought to the doorstep. Work can be done from a chair. Entertainment arrives through a screen. The burden of keeping ourselves warm has been outsourced to systems we barely understand and do not control. When those systems falter, it feels like an emergency because we have forgotten how much warmth we can make simply by existing differently. In the Viking world, that knowledge is not a bonus. It is built into the culture like grain is built into bread. When the cold comes, you do not argue with it. You hitch up your belt, pull your hood tighter, and start moving. By the time you sit, you've already fought half the battle. And when you finally do lie down, layers wrapped around you, belly full, muscles pleasantly sore, you can feel the afterglow of that day-long war against the cold still radiating from your core. The fire in the hearth might go out, it often does, but as long as you can get back up in the morning and put your body to work again, the most important heat source in your life will not be the flames in the middle of the room. It will be the quiet, stubborn burn of your own muscles, answering the cold's demand with effort, again and again, until spring. The first time the cold really scared you. You were told. Not scared in the simple way, the way you flinched when your bare feet hit the frozen floor, or when the wind knifed through a gap in the door. That kind of fear is sharp and brief, and you learn to swallow it quickly, because the adults around you did not have time to soothe it every morning. No, the first real fear came on a different kind of night. It was late in winter, the kind of late where the world felt tired of being frozen, but refused to thaw. Food had grown dull and limited, people moved slower, everything smelled faintly of smoke and wool and fatigue. Outside, a storm had risen without drama, beginning as fine dry snow and building all day into a thick wall of grey. By evening, the house itself seemed to shrink. The sound of the wind changed from a whistle to a body. You could hear it pressing on the turf walls, feel it in the timbers. Snow piled up against the single door until the line where the floor met the threshold blurred into a mound. When someone tried to look out, only hard white darkness stared back. The adults exchanged glances. Not panicked, not yet, but sharper than usual. This is how children learn what to feel, not from words, but from the tiny changes in the bodies they depend on. A jaw clenching a little harder, a pause before a sentence. A hand held a fraction too long on a latch. You sat on the sleeping platform, cloak wrapped tight, and felt something crawl up through your insides. Cold, but not from the air this time. A thought, what if it gets worse? What if the roof goes? What if we can't get out? It was not just the weather that frightened you. It was the sense that the world outside these walls was fundamentally hostile, and that all the warm, bright things in your life were balanced on something fragile. You must have made a sound or a face because an elder, your grandfather perhaps, or an older aunt, turned to look at you. Their hair was grey, eyebrows thick with age, shadowed by a lifetime of squinting into wind and sun and smoke. They held your gaze for a moment, then crooked a finger. You went to them, because that is what you did. They patted the space beside them, pulled a blanket tighter over your shoulders, and spoke in a tone that was so utterly ordinary, you felt lighter even before you understood the words. "It's a storm," they said. "There have always been storms." That was the beginning of the lesson that would follow you into adulthood. In this world, cold and hardship were not an error in the system. They were the system. The Norse did not grow up expecting comfort and getting shocked when it was taken away. They grew up expecting struggle and feeling gratitude in the intervals when life eased its hand. You can see this in the stories they told themselves. In the sagas, winter hardships are not usually the focus of the drama. They are the backdrop. You read of men riding across frozen seas, of families snowed in for weeks, of journeys delayed by ice, almost as asides. They wintered there, a line will say. And although the ink is dry and the words are brief, you know what that meant. Months of managing cold, darkness, tight quarters, scarce food. The sagas do not stop each time to say, "This was difficult." Of course it was difficult. That hardly needs mentioning. What they focus on instead are the choices made within that difficulty. How someone handled an insult at a feast, whether they broke a truce, who sat where in the hall, which alliances held and which failed. The cold is present in every scene, like gravity. You do not narrate gravity in every sentence. You assume it. In the same way, you do not dwell on the fact that life hurts. You talk about what you do with that fact. This does something quiet but powerful to the mind. If you live in a culture where comfort is the baseline and discomfort is a kind of glitch, then every time you're cold or hungry or tired, you feel as though something has gone wrong. Your nervous system treats the experience as an emergency, a break in the story. Fear spikes, anger rises. You may even feel insulted by the universe, as if it has broken a promise. Fear and anger are not just feelings, they are physical states. When you're scared or outraged, your body pulls blood back toward your core, away from the skin. Your heart bangs against your ribs. Your muscles tense, ready to fight or flee. Your attention narrows. You become more aware of threats, less aware of subtle comforts. In that state, you literally feel colder. Your fingers stiffen. Your toes ache more. The air itself seems sharper. The Vikings, without modern words for hormones or stress responses, built a worldview that blunted that effect. You were taught, from the sagas and the sayings and the lives of the people around you, that hardship was not a special message of hatred from the gods. It was the default material you were made from. Odin himself suffered to gain wisdom, hanging on the world tree, sacrificing his eye. Thor laboured and strained and made mistakes. The Norns did not weave an easy cloth. They wove a necessary one. If you expect the cold, you are not shocked by it. It still hurts. It still seeps into your bones. But it does not carry the same poison of, this is not supposed to happen. Instead, your inner voice sounds more like the elder's voice by the bed. It's a storm. There have always been storms. This is not apathy. It is a kind of hardness. Hardness here does not mean cruelty or numbness. It means a capacity to endure without dissolving. The Norse did not have a word for resilience in a psychology textbook, but they had stories of people who bent and people who broke, and they knew which they wanted to be. Your childhood brain soaked all of this up. When your grandfather told you about the time he was trapped in a snow cave for 2 days, with only a knife, some dried meat, and a bad-tempered companion, he did not describe it as trauma. He described it as a thing that happened. He might even have laughed at some detail. The real emphasis fell on who kept their head and who didn't. Listening, you learned that panic was shameful and steady endurance was admirable. The next time the wind rattled the roof, you still felt that initial thread of fear. Your body still responded. But now, braided through, it was something else. A sense that this was your turn to answer a question asked of every person in your line. Would you collapse or would you stand? That sense of being inside a story that expects you to be tested changes the way your body experiences cold. Modern research supports this, although the Norse never needed a lab to see it. People who feel helpless and alone under stress show more extreme physical reactions. Their hearts pound more. Their blood pressure spikes higher. Their perception of pain increases. People who feel that their struggle has meaning, or that they are part of something larger, show calmer physiology even in the same conditions. You can see this difference with your own eyes on a winter's day. Watch 2 people carry the same heavy load of wood across the snow. One curses every step, muttering about how unfair it is, how their back hurts, how no one appreciates them. Their face contorts. They walk slightly hunched, as if the cold is an insult. The other grunts and sweats, and maybe cracks a joke. But there is a different set to their shoulders. They are doing this because the animals need fodder, or because the children need warmth tonight, or because this is simply what has to be done. The load is equally heavy, but it feels different from the inside. In the long run, the second person's body wears the strain better. For the Vikings, meaning was everywhere, because danger was everywhere. If you could be killed by a storm, a rock slide, a misstep on a ship, a bad cut that goes rotten, then every time you survived another season, it felt like a kind of rough grace. The gods were not gentle, they were often terrifying, capricious, demanding, but they were present. The world was thick with intention. Trees whispered, winds spoke, animals carried omens. Your suffering was not happening in an empty, indifferent universe. It was part of a pattern. This does not erase the cold, but it changes its flavour. Cold in an empty universe is pure hostility. Cold in a world where gods and ancestors are watching is a trial. Trials are things you can pass, things you can tell stories about later, things that can make you, in some fierce, costly way, more yourself. On a physical level, that difference between I am being pointlessly tortured and I am being tested can produce different hormones. Less corrosive cortisol, more steady adrenaline. Less slumping despair, more focused alertness. That in turn affects how your body distributes heat. A person in despair goes slack, shivers more, curls in on themselves, breathes shallowly. A person who thinks, I must get through this, tends to move more, breathe deeper, make decisions. Exactly the behaviours that generate warmth. It is not only belief in gods that does this, belief in each other matters just as much. Emotional warmth is not a metaphor, it has temperature. On another night, later in life, you feel this more clearly than ever. The storm is not as bad as that childhood one, but winter has gone on too long. Everyone is thinner than they were. The animals take more from the hayloft each day. The barrel of dried fish is lower. People's patience is worn and patched. And yet tonight, the house feels strangely bright. Someone has brought news from a neighbouring farm. A birth, a betrothal, word of a ship returned safely. Someone else has killed a pig, and though most of the meat must be preserved, there are fresh cuts in the pot. The smell of cooking fat is round and rich in the air. Children are restless with an energy you haven't seen in weeks. After the meal, when the pot has been scraped clean, and every last glistening scrap chased into a mouth, someone suggests stories. Not in a performative way. Not, now we shall have entertainment. More like a sigh. Tell us about, and a name. An elder shifts on the platform, pulling their cloak around their shoulders. Their voice is rough with age and smoke, but it carries. The fire is low, banked under a drift of ash, only the occasional lick of flame showing red. Shadows climb the walls, flickering. The room is cold enough that your breath still fogs in the air if you exhale sharply, but under the blankets, with a full belly and a warm body at your side, you feel held. The story is one you have heard before, but that does not matter. You know how it begins. You know the shape of its middle, the moment where all seems lost, the twist that returns everything to order or changes the world forever. You know the characters, some long dead, some maybe myth, some the ancestors of the people lying in this very room. You know the lessons you are supposed to take from it, about bravery or cunning or loyalty or the price of failure. But every time you hear something a little different. Tonight, what lodges in you is not the hero's triumph, but the moment of solidarity when his comrades choose to stand with him, even though they are afraid. The line about the man who goes to his friend's side, though the frost bites and the wolves howl. You feel in your own body the echo. We are doing that now. We are together, under attack from a different enemy, but the same principle holds. You glance around the dim room. Faces catch the ember light at odd angles. Smoke softens features. A child leans sleepily against their mother, head bobbing. A dog sighs and shifts by the door. Someone laughs quietly at a familiar part of the tale. Someone else wipes their nose on their sleeve. The elder's hands move as they speak, drawing shapes in the air. You realise, in a way you cannot yet put into words, that you are not just warm because of the blankets or the lingering heat of food. You are warm because you're woven into something. The people in this room know your name. They know your habits, your strengths, your faults. If smoke wakes them in the night, they will think of you, along with everyone else, and reach for you. If you fall sick, they will rearrange work to cover your tasks. If you disappear in a storm, they will look. Modern science would call this social support. It would point to studies showing that people who feel lonely literally feel colder than people in identical rooms who believe themselves cared for. Their skin temperature drops more. Their threshold for cold discomfort is lower. Their inflammatory markers are worse. Loneliness is a physical climate as much as an emotional one. The Vikings did not have graphs. They had winter. They knew from bitter experience that a person who believed themselves abandoned was more likely to give up. Stop moving, stop eating, stop going out to break ice and bring water. A person who believed that their effort mattered to others, that their presence was necessary, could be coaxed through another day. Feasts, then, were not just about gluttony, they were about shoring up this fabric, gathering your kin and neighbours into the hall, feeding them, sharing news, playing games, exchanging gifts, all reinforced the sense that you were part of a net, that someone would catch you if you slipped, that the cold outside, no matter how fierce, did not have direct access to your heart. In that sense, the songs and stories and shared danger of a Viking winter were as much a part of the secret system of warmth as wool and wood. You can be wrapped in the best clothing, lying on the best bedding, in a well-built house and still feel chilled to the bone if you believe yourself alone and doomed. Your body closes up, trying to guard its small remaining fire. You shiver and cannot get comfortable. You startle at every noise. You can be in a drafty, smoky longhouse, with modest food and tired blankets, and feel, in some deep place, strangely secure if you are surrounded by people you trust and live inside a story that makes sense of your suffering. This does not mean Vikings never felt despair. The sagas are full of people breaking, making terrible choices, losing faith. But even their despair is shaped by a worldview that has edges you can lean on. Fate may be brutal, but it is not random. Honour may be costly, but it is real. Shame may burn hotter than any hearth, but it tells you that your actions matter. All of this builds a mental stance toward cold that we, in our climate-controlled age, struggle to imagine. When you step out into the wind in the morning, you do not think, "Why is it like this?" You think, "Of course it's like this. Now, what is required of me?" When your fingers sting, you do not interpret it as proof that the universe hates you. You read it as a signal. Move more, cover them, change what you are doing. When your breath smokes in front of you in a way that signals deeper cold than yesterday, you do not say, "This should not be happening." You say, "It's worse, I must work differently." That subtle shift from complaint to response does not magically warm the air. It does, however, change the way your nervous system allocates resources. Complaining without acting is a way of rehearsing helplessness. Responding, even with small acts, is a way of rehearsing agency. Agency tends to loosen the knot of stress in your chest. Looser knots mean better blood flow to skin and extremities. Better blood flow means you feel warmer. The Vikings accidentally understood this, because their lives made the alternative unbearable. There is another side to this mental system, darker, but still part of why it worked: their familiarity with death. When you live in a time and place where death from cold, hunger, illness, childbirth, accident, and violence is common, you cannot pretend it is something far off and optional. Children see bodies. Adults talk about it with a matter-of-factness that would seem harsh to us. The sagas report deaths in a line or two, then move on to what happened next. This does not mean they did not grieve. They grieved hard. But death was not a crack in the world. It was a door everyone must eventually go through. Knowing this changes your relationship to fear. If you believe, on some level, that death is impossible or intolerable, then every brush with danger threatens to open a chasm under your feet. Your body reacts with a kind of total panic because the stakes feel absolute. If you know deeply that you will die someday, that everyone does, it is still frightening to be in danger. But the fear has somewhere to land. It is more focused. I might die now sooner than I'd hoped, rather than this must not be. Some modern studies have shown that people who make peace with the idea of mortality, whether through spiritual beliefs or personal reflection, show calmer physiological responses in crises than those who avoid thinking about it. Their hearts race less wildly, their decisions are clearer, their hands shake less. For a Viking caught in a blizzard or lost at sea, that edge of calm could be the difference between flailing and taking effective action, between lying down in the snow because the situation feels hopeless and forcing yourself to move because even a small chance is worth it. Their myths reinforce this. Ragnarok, the twilight of the gods, is not averted, it comes. The gods themselves die, even they cannot escape the deeper pattern, and yet the stories still celebrate those who stand and fight when the end arrives. Courage is redefined away from "I will not die" to "I will not fail to meet this as I should." That definition of courage makes enduring cold a different kind of act. When you choose to go out into a storm to save an animal or fetch a lost child, or simply do the necessary work, you are not just braving the elements. You are participating in an ongoing, meaningful story about what it means to be part of your people. Meaning is a heater. You feel this in your own chest in small ways too. On a day when you labour only for yourself, with no sense of why, cold is sharper. On a day when you haul hay or mend nets or chop wood for others you love, the same temperature feels less cruel. Your body is doing the same work. The story you tell yourself about the work is different. The story changes the chemistry changes the sensation. When you add all of this together, worldview, expectation, normalization of struggle, emotional warmth of community, familiarity with mortality, you get a mind that meets the cold not as something outrageous, but as something to be mastered, or at least managed. That mental stance does not make you immune to frostbite. It does not mean you cannot be caught out, misjudge, or simply be unlucky. But across thousands of nights, for countless people in unheated rooms, it shaves off the sharpest edge of the cold's bite. The secret way Vikings stayed warm without fire was never only about walls, beds, cloaks, or food. It was also about the stories that lived in their heads. Stories that told them the world was hard, but not senseless. That suffering was normal, but not meaningless. That they belonged to each other, and that this belonging had weight. On that long winter night, as you lie under blankets, listening to the elder's voice and the low rumble of the storm outside, you feel a warmth that has nothing to do with temperature. It is in the way the person beside you shifts to make room without complaint, in the way the storyteller's voice cracks a little on a well-loved line and everyone smiles in the dark, in the way your own fear from childhood storms has mellowed into respect. You are not alone. You are not a mistake. You are part of a chain of people who have all felt this same cold and answered it in the same ways. With work, with wool, with food, with stories, with one another. The embers on the hearth glow faintly, then dull, then glow again as someone stirs them in passing. Inside your chest, under your ribs, another ember glows, the quiet, durable knowledge that you have what you need to face this night, not just on your skin, but in your mind. The night the fire finally dies, no one notices at first. It happens slowly, the way most important things do. Not with a crash, but with a series of tiny, unremarkable choices that add up. Someone forgets to add a last good log before lying down. The wind outside shifts and draws a little stronger up through the smoke hole. The embers that have glowed dutifully all evening settle under their own ash. A piece of half-burnt wood collapses in on itself with a soft sigh. The light on the rafters fades from orange to dull red to nothing. If this were a modern house with a boiler in the cellar, or a glowing panel on the wall, that would be the moment panic begins. One point of failure goes, and the whole illusion of safety goes with it. The radiators click and cool. The air seems to exhale. You are left staring at the one machine you have trusted to be humming in the background, suddenly inert, and you realize how little else you have. In this Viking longhouse, in the deep of winter, the fire is important, but it is not alone. You are lying on the sleeping platform along the far wall, wrapped in layers of wool and fur. The room smells of smoke still, because the rafters have been inhaling it all day and breathing it out slowly. It smells of bodies and tallow and the faint sour sweet of dried fish. The air is cool enough that, if you exhale sharply, you can still see your breath in front of your face for a moment before it disappears into the dark. But under the blankets, the world is different. You're in the middle of it tonight, between your younger brother and an older cousin. They are hot sleepers, both of them. Your brother sprawls, one bare foot describing small arcs under the shared covers, always seeking some cold patch even on the coldest nights. Your cousin curls, not in fear, but in the compact way of someone whose muscles have learned to rest with efficiency. You can feel the heat from them both, where your shoulders and hips touch theirs. On your other side, across a narrow gap, your mother shifts in her sleep. You hear the soft whisper of wool on wool as she pulls her cloak closer. Beyond her, your father's breath comes slow and even, a low rumble like a distant forge. Further still, in the dimness toward the door, others you love and half-love, and sometimes resent, and always rely on, are arrayed in their places. The platform itself is an old ally. Its wooden planks have seen decades of winters, and though they do not move, they remember. They are raised from the dirt floor, which means you are not lying on cold earth, but on stored warmth. The space underneath is full of things, tools hung on hooks, spare gear, but mostly it is full of air, a layer of insulation between your body and the ground. On top of those planks is the straw. You can smell it even through the wool, that faint, dry, grassy scent. It crackles softly when someone turns, then settles again. Each hollow stem, each broken piece of stalk, holds a little pocket of air. Together those countless pockets form a cushion that lifts you slightly, embraces your shape, and slows the speed at which your heat leaks away. Above that, between you and the room, the wool. The blanket nearest your skin is rougher, woven from coarser wool, but you hardly feel it anymore. Over that is something softer, an older piece, well used, the lanolin half worn away, but the loft still good. Near your shoulders and chest, there is fur, sheep mostly, and maybe a strip of fox where someone once sewed pieces together in a quiet winter evening. The fur turns the small space over your chest into a tiny weather system of its own, catching and slowing your breath, turning it from cold air to humid warmth in seconds. You do not know when exactly the last ember on the hearth gives up its red glow. You're already asleep, sunk into the weight and smell and rhythm of the bodies around you. The house, in that sense, is working exactly as designed. It has thrown every layer it has between you and the outside, and now it will see you through as far as its stored heat and your own can manage. Outside, the world is uncompromising. Snow lies over the yard, up the walls, banked against the byre. The sky is clear now, after an earlier squall, pricked with stars that glitter with indifferent intensity. The air is so cold that everything that can rest has frozen. Puddles, troughs, the breath of animals in tendrils on their fur. Any part of your skin exposed to it for more than a few minutes would sting, then go numb, then lose the memory of warmth entirely. But between you and that sky are many layers of defence, some visible, some not. The first layer is earth. The Longhouse does not sit lightly on the land. It is partly of the land. Thick turf walls rise from the ground, cut from nearby fields, and stacked so that their root mats knit together into a dense living barrier. Beneath their outer skin of snow, those walls are heavy with stored coolth from summer and stored warmth from earlier days of fire and breath. They do not shift much on a single night. The temperature inside their bulk changes slowly, resisting any sudden lunge from outside. The second layer is wood. Timbers frame the house, forming the bones that hold the earth skin in tension. Inside, the rafters span overhead, dark and smoke-stained, thick with the history of years of use. They carry the weight of the roof, turf again, in many places, or overlapping planks, so you do not have to. They also hold on to heat. Every day that the fire has burned, every meal cooked, every pot boiled, has sent hot air upward. That heat has brushed those beams, warmed them by a margin, sunk into their fibres. Now, in the long emberless hours, they give that warmth back in a slow exhale. The third layer is space itself. The Longhouse is not huge, not in the way of a modern hall. Its ceiling is lower than you imagine when you hear the word hall in stories, forcing air to gather and thicken rather than vanish upward into a vast, pointless dome. The width is modest, that is deliberate. A smaller volume of air is easier for bodies to warm and harder for the outside cold to strip bare. The door is low and well fitted. Each time someone dug more turf to patch it, They were thinking about more than keeping out thieves or wolves. They were plugging leaks in a vessel that holds warmth as surely as a ship holds air afloat on water. Windows are small if they exist at all, and covered when not needed. Every crack plugged with wool, moss, straw. Every gap closed with intention. This architecture does not create warmth out of nothing. It simply slows the bleeding. The warmth itself comes from the system inside. Even now, with the fire dead, the temperature in the room does not drop to match the outside. It falls gently, like a tide receding, and it meets resistance at every step. The air nearest the now cold hearth cools first. It sinks a little, washed along the floor. But here another piece of the system wakes up. Between the bodies on the platform and the line of animals in the attached byre, this house is full of small fires. Cattle, sheep, goats. Each animal there is quietly burning fuel, releasing heat. They are layered in their own protections. Hide, fat, their own beds of straw. But some of their warmth leaks out into the shared air. On most nights, the fire and the animals and the people together create a baseline climate in the Longhouse that, while still cold by modern standards, is livable, even cosy. On this night, as the fire's contribution fades, the animals keep doing what they always do. Their breath steams in the dark, their bodies radiating a low, steady warmth against the stable walls. That heat is not enough by itself to keep the room comfortable, but it raises the minimum. Then there are the people. Under the bedding, you are far from still. You toss and turn, not just from dreams, but from the simple fact that no human lies truly motionless all night. Arms flex, legs stretch, someone rolls over, a child whimpers, kicks free of a blanket, is gently pulled back into the fold by someone half asleep. Each of those movements stirs muscles, each contraction burns a sliver of fuel and releases another tiny packet of heat. Earlier in the evening, before lying down, everyone in this house moved on purpose. They went through the familiar dance of late tasks, hauling in extra wood, just in case, breaking ice on the trough, checking the roof, ensuring every animal had what it needed. Those last, short bursts of work pumped their inner furnaces higher. They came to bed with bodies humming rather than drained, with blood moving briskly rather than sluggishly. That starting point matters now more than ever. The meal matters too. Tonight's food was heavy in exactly the right ways for this event. Fat from preserved meat and fish, stirred into porridge thick with barley or oats, bits of boiled liver or heart, fermented dairy, tangy and filling. This is not light fare. It sits in the stomach like a warm stone. But as your grandmother said, patting your shoulder when you leaned back from your second bowl, better to carry the food inside you than in the larder. As you sleep, your digestive system continues its slow, grinding labour. It turns those fats and proteins into usable energy, releasing heat as it does so. Some of that energy goes into repairing muscles and fighting off winter illnesses. Some restores the reserves in your liver and fat stores. A portion simply burns to maintain the miracle number of your core temperature. The blankets and walls and bodies and animals form the container. The food keeps the contents hot. All of this is held together by something harder to see. A pattern of choices and expectations that mean that, when the fire fails, no one wastes energy on useless panic. There is, built into everyone here, from elders to children, the unspoken understanding that the fire going out is a problem, but not the end of the world. It has happened before, it will happen again. There are embers enough in the ash to coax it back in the morning. If, for some reason, there are not, there are neighbours and coals can be borrowed. Meanwhile, the house was never designed under the assumption that the fire would be invincible. So you sleep, not with the thoughtless security of someone who trusts machinery to hum forever, but with the seasoned confidence of someone whose safety is spread across many nets. The temperature in the Longhouse continues to fall through the small hours, but never to lethal levels. Out in the yard, a pot of water left uncovered would freeze hard. In here, at worst, ice might fur thinly along the inside of a bucket near the door. Near the platform, in the bowl of air above the sleeping bodies, the chill comes in careful degrees. Your exposed nose complains. You pull the fur higher over your face without quite waking. Somewhere near the door, a draft snakes under, cold enough to make a dog shift and tuck its paws under its belly. But the combination of architecture, bedding, clothing, food, movement, and shared bodies keeps the heart of the house above the line where sleep becomes shock. This is the strength of the system, redundancy. If the walls were poorly built, full of gaps and drafts, even the best bedding might not keep you warm. If the bedding were thin, straw old and packed flat, blankets worn to threadbare, even the best food and movement might not be enough to hold off the cold. If you slept alone, on a pallet in a big empty room, even thick walls and good straw and solid meals might not prevent your fingers and toes from drifting toward frostbite. But here, failures are contained and compensated. Imagine for a moment that your cloak is not as thick as it once was. Moths have had their way with it. The wool is tired. During the day you feel the cold a little more when you work outside. Your shoulders ache sooner. But when you come back in, the house catches you. The warm meal pushes your inner fire up. The Longhouse walls keep the worst of the wind off. The communal sleeping platform offers you the shared warmth of others. The lack of a perfect cloak makes the other parts of the system more important, but it does not ruin the whole. Or say the opposite. The Longhouse is smaller, poorer, more makeshift than you'd like. The turf walls are thinner. There is a draft you cannot quite track down. The house loses heat faster than your neighbour's better-built one. That is a problem, but again, not a fatal one. You compensate by using more bedding, by sleeping closer together, by prioritising heavier evening meals, by timing work so you come in as hot as possible. The system flexes. It is not ideal, but it is not brittle. The same logic applies out on the ship. On a winter voyage, there is no fire. The architecture is reversed. Instead of earth holding back the air, you are in a wooden shell on an enormous, indifferent, cold engine of water. The only inherited warmth is whatever the planks have clung to from a day in the sun, and in winter that is not much. The air moves constantly. There is no ceiling to trap it. Yet again the system spreads the burden. Clothing is heavier, cloaks finer and fuller, chosen for this purpose. Food on the journey is selected for high energy. Dried fish, preserved meat, grain that can be quickly turned into porridge, butter carried in sealed containers. Work, the rowing itself, the constant adjustments, the baled water, is not a regrettable side effect, but a core part of staying warm. The crew sleeps in shifts, often wrapped in their cloaks, bodies pressed against one another under whatever shelter can be rigged from spare sailcloth. They time their rest after intense work and solid eating, so they go into those cold hours with inner fires as high as they can afford. If someone's cloak is too thin, they are nudged closer to the middle of the sleeping knot. If a man is sick and cannot row as much, he gets a better place under the makeshift tent and an extra piece of fat from the food bag. If the sea spray makes everyone's legs ache with cold, someone suggests a round of hauling, stomping in place, singing, a way to turn misery into movement. Each of these choices arises from experience, not from theory. No one sat down generations ago and wrote, "Design of holistic warmth system for high-latitude culture." They learned by freezing, by watching who came back from a journey and who didn't, by paying attention to which houses seemed to lose elders faster in hard winters, by seeing, over and over, that those who moved more, ate certain foods, slept closer, and built differently fared better. Over time, all of this hardened into tradition. You grow up inside that tradition, absorbing it without needing to be told. This is a layered redundancy strategy to mitigate thermal risk. You simply know that you are supposed to bring in extra wood before bed, to eat one more bite of fatty stew when the cold is sharp, to wrap your younger sibling tighter if you wake and find them uncovered, to mend your cloak as soon as a tear appears, to plug a draft when you feel it. You do not treat any one element as sufficient. This is perhaps the most striking difference with us now. We tend to look for a trick, A single product or fix that promises to solve a problem so we can stop thinking about it. A jacket advertised to keep you warm, no matter what. A heater that covers the whole room in minutes. A diet that will boost your metabolism all winter. We buy the thing, install it, and assume the problem is solved. Then when the boiler fails, when the power goes out in a storm, when the miracle fabric proves less miraculous in wet wind, we are left with almost nothing beneath it. The Vikings, living in a world where any single thing could fail for reasons beyond their control, rarely put all their trust in one basket. If the fire went out, there was still the house. If the house was draughty, there was still the bed. If the bed was thin, there was still the cloak and the bodies beside you. If your own inner fire was low, because food was scarce, there was still someone to share their portion and their heat. If, in some terrible alignment of bad luck, all of those were weak at once, poor house, poor bed, poor clothes, lean season, there was still the hardest layer, the mind that refused to fold easily, the will to move, to huddle, to endure, until the next opportunity to improve one of the other layers arose. No single layer was perfect. Together, they were enough. In the Longhouse, sometime in the darkest hour of that fireless night, someone wakes, not because of the cold, but because of life. Maybe a full bladder, maybe a stray dream, maybe the press of another body. They blink, feel the cool air on the bridge of their nose, and register the silence where the soft crackle of embers should be. They do not gasp. They do not shake you awake, crying, "The fire's gone out. We're going to freeze." They note the fact, then note the rest. Their own warmth under the blankets, the warmth of others, the barely there chill along the edge of the platform nearest the door, the sounds of sleeping animals on the other side of the partition. They know, in their bones, that the system is holding. Tomorrow, when grey light filters in and breath fogs in cloudier puffs for a while, they will rake through the ash, find one stubborn ember still breathing under the cold powder, and coax it into flame again with patience and skill. If, by chance, even that ember is gone, they will send someone to a neighbour's house with a lidded pot and a polite request. The wider web catches them, a community of households, each with their own layered systems, overlapping at the edges. For now, they simply adjust a blanket here, tuck a child's foot back under cover, perhaps lay a hand briefly on the breast of someone they love to feel the steady, warm rise and fall. Then they lie back down, turn their face toward the wall to escape the faint draught from the door, and let the rest of the system do its work. There is something deeply sophisticated in this unhurried confidence. We like to imagine ourselves as the advanced ones, with our thermostats and insulation ratings and thermal cameras. We draw diagrams of heat transfer, make calculations, publish survival manuals with neat lists. Wear this, eat that, do these exercises, build your shelter at this angle. The Vikings had none of that language, but they arrived by centuries of rough trial and error at a multi-layered strategy that our best advice now often struggles to imitate. Work with, not against, the environment. Build low, thick, earth-bonded houses that slow heat loss instead of airy towers that must be heated constantly. Trap and reuse what you already produce. Body heat, animal heat, the thermal mass of walls warmed by daylight and daily fires. Turn clothing into portable architecture. Concentrate on trapping air, not just adding thickness, and on keeping the core warm rather than chasing a sensation of fleeting surface warmth. Feed the inner fire. Align meals and macronutrients with the times when warmth is most needed, carrying fuel inside you instead of relying solely on external sources. Move as default, treat cold as a cue to act, not to retreat, so that your muscles become auxiliary heaters instead of idle passengers. Anchor all of it in a worldview and community that reduce the corrosive effects of fear and loneliness, so that your nervous system is an ally in staying warm instead of an amplifier of suffering. No one part is the secret. The secret is that there is no secret. There is only a system. On that night when the fire goes out, your survival does not hinge on whether you have the right brand of cloak, or the strongest house, or the fattest sheep. It hinges on whether all the modest things you have, the house you can manage, the clothes you could make, the food you could store, the people you live among, the stories you believe, are arranged so that each catches you when another slips. It is easy, from a world of switches and dials, to think of warmth as something a machine gives you. The Vikings remind us that, for most of human history, warmth was something you built out of relationships, between stone and timber, flesh and fibre, labour and food, body and body, mind and meaning. When the visible flame disappears, those relationships do not. They keep working quietly through the long night, earth holding off the sky, wood slowing the wind, wool cradling air, food feeding cells, muscles answering cold with action, hearts beating near other hearts. By the time the first weak light of morning touches the smoke hole, the house is colder than it was. Your nose is red, your breath fogs, but you are alive. You are warm where it matters most, under your ribs, in the sleeping bundle of your own body held among others. The secret way people from Viking times stayed warm without fire was not magic, it was this. The first time your heater dies in winter, you probably react like the fire was a god that just abandoned you. You hear a click you're not used to, or you notice the steady hum has gone silent. The radiators that were lukewarm a minute ago are now just metal. You put your hand on them, as if you're checking the pulse of a sick animal. Nothing. You stand in the middle of your room, in a city apartment or a suburban house, or a student flat where the windows rattle in their frames, and for a few seconds you feel something that would have been very familiar to a farmer in Norway 1200 years ago. The awareness that, outside these walls, winter does not care whether you live or die. The cold waits, patient as gravity. You feel it in the glass of the window, in the draught under the door, in the way the air on the floor is already cooler than the air near your face. You are wearing light clothes because the heating used to make that possible. You have thin socks on because you weren't planning to go anywhere. You were planning to let a hidden system do all the work of keeping your core at that invisible, miraculous, precise temperature where your cells function and your mind can think about anything other than survival. For a moment, your thoughts go exactly where the modern world has trained them to go. You check an app, you Google the power company, you wonder how long it will take to fix. You picture pipes freezing, food going bad, sleeping in your coat. You imagine, absurdly but honestly, that you might die of this, of your heating being off for a few hours, in a building that still has a roof and walls, because you have been taught, by design, to rely on a single point of failure. Then maybe you remember a different winter. Not one you actually lived through, but one you've walked through in your mind. A longhouse with turf walls and smoke-blackened rafters. A ship pushing through icy waves. Someone lying between others on a straw-filled platform, feeling warmth without any visible flame. You remember that the people who survived those winters did it with a system, not a trick. They didn't have central heating. They didn't have double glazing. They couldn't call anyone to come fix the weather. They built a life in which no single failure meant instant catastrophe, because every part of that life contributed something to warmth. You are not going to become a Viking. You are not going to move into a turf house, fill your hallway with sheep, or start eating fermented fish by the barrel. You are not going to ditch your job and live by tides and seasons. You live here now in an age of thermostats and electric grids and building codes and neighbours who might know your name or might not, but the principles that kept them alive on nights when the fire went out are not locked in the past. They are human principles. They will work on the 5th floor as surely as they worked on a fjord. You don't have to copy their details. You have to understand their pattern. Think for a moment about that longhouse on a winter night when the last flame dies. No one is relying on one thing. The house itself holds some warmth because of how it is built. The bedding holds more. Clothing holds more still. Food eaten at the right time feeds the inner fire. Movement through the day creates heat to store. The presence of others thickens the air, with shared breath and shared bodies. The stories and beliefs people hold in their heads Stop fear from turning every cold draught into a terror. It is a web, not a single line. When one strand snaps, the others take the weight. In your own life, a Viking-inspired way of staying warm is not about putting horns on your hat. It is about weaving a similar web instead of hanging all your safety from one invisible hook on the wall. You start with the simplest thing of all: slowing the loss. Heat is not a substance that a boiler creates and you receive like charity. It is always being made and always being lost. Your body is a little furnace that runs 24 hours a day, burning whatever fuel you give it. Your job, if you want to stay warm when the grid flickers, is to waste less of what you already produce. You walk to the window and put your hand against the pane. Cold. You can feel the outside through it, the way a Longhouse wall feels the night on its outer skin. You don't have turf to pile against it, but you do have options: thick curtains, a blanket tacked over the frame, a towel shoved along the sill to block the draft. These aren't glamorous hacks. They're not going to appear on a glossy list of 10 life-changing winter gadgets. They're simply the modern version of stuffing moss between beams. Cheap, small acts that slow the speed at which the warmth you make runs away. You look at the floor. In a medieval house, the sleeping platform was raised to escape the ground chill. In your place, the cold pulls along the floorboards or tiles. If your bed is low, you're lying where that chill is strongest. You can't rebuild your architecture tonight, but you can put a rug down. You can slide a sheet of cardboard or a folded blanket under your mattress. You can move your bed a little further from an exterior wall. These changes aren't dramatic. They are not romantic, but they turn down the leak in the bucket so your body doesn't have to work as hard. Then you move up the layers. Clothing, in the Viking world, wasn't fashion first. It was architecture. You open a drawer and look at what you actually own. Hidden under the pile of thin t-shirts and fashionable but thin sweaters, there might be a thick pair of wool socks you never wear because they feel too heavy indoors. There might be a sweater, a relative knitted that you think of as for outdoors. A scarf you usually reserve for stepping outside. A Viking would find this distinction absurd. Indoors and outdoors were not different universes. They were gradients. Wool is wool. Warmth is warmth. You put it where you need it. You put on the socks, an extra shirt, the sweater, a hat, even if it feels strange to wear one in your own living room. Almost immediately, something subtle changes, not in the room, in you. The air is still cold, the window is still a thin sheet between you and the night, but the margins of your body, the places where heat usually slips away first, feet and hands and scalp, are less exposed. Your furnace no longer has to fight as hard to keep your core at that invisible number. You are building, on your own skin, the same kind of still air pockets that Vikings built into their cloaks. Then you think of food. In their world, the evening meal was not a delicate salad eaten at 10 p.m. in front of a screen. It was a strategic delivery of fat and protein at a time of day when there was still enough waking time to start digesting before sleep, but not so much that all the heat and energy got burned off in more labour. You walk to your kitchen. You may not have fresh caught fish or slabs of mutton on the bone, but you probably have something that isn't just sugar in a pretty wrapper. Beans, eggs, lentils, peanuts, cheese, oil. Even instant noodles become a different thing if you crack an egg into them and add a spoon of butter. The point isn't to feast, it's to give your internal fire something substantial to work on, so that as you slip under your own bedding, your body is not running on fumes. You make something warm, not just a drink, which will heat you for 10 minutes and vanish, but a small bowl of real food. You eat it sitting away from the coldest window, with a blanket over your knees if you like. You feel the warmth of it move down, expanding behind your ribs. Then you think of movement. The Viking day was structured so that by the time they lay down, their muscles were already radiating the residue of effort. They did not go from 10 hours of sitting, straight-backed and frozen under blue light, to bed. They went from chopping, hauling, walking, rowing, tending animals, mending, thousands of contractions that turned fuel into both work and heat. Your own life may not require you to break ice on troughs at dawn. It may require you to sit, breathe shallowly, and scroll. That is not a moral failing. It is a consequence of the way your era has shaped work. But you can still choose, on a cold night, to answer the chill more like they did. You stand up from your chair. You do not need equipment. Your body is equipment. You can do squats in your living room. You can do push-ups against the kitchen counter. You can walk quickly up and down the stairs in your building. You can put music on and dance in socks on the rug like an idiot. The point is not fitness. The point is friction. Muscles contracting, heart pumping, lungs pulling in and warming cold air before it hits the delicate structures deeper inside. 5 minutes. 10? Long enough to be slightly breathless, to feel the heat creep up your neck, to peel off one layer and then put it back on, feeling its texture differently. When you sit down again, wrapped in your layers, your sweater and socks and blankets suddenly work like multipliers instead of substitutes. They trap the heat you just earned. You are not asking them to create comfort out of nothing. Then perhaps you turn your attention to the thing Vikings built so well and modern life quietly starves. Company. You may not live crowded into a single room with extended family and animals. You might live alone, or with one other person who is wrapped in their own bubble of headphones and glowing screens. Emotional warmth does not come built into your architecture the way it did in a longhouse. You have to build it consciously. You send a message. Maybe you invite someone over, if that's an option. Maybe you ask a housemate to sit in the same room for a while, even if you are each doing different things. Maybe you just call someone and talk voice to voice about anything that isn't the failure of the heater. Old stories, shared jokes, quiet confessions, plans for spring. The physical effect is smaller than a wool blanket, but not negligible. Your nervous system, reassured that you are not an isolated animal about to die unseen, eases its grip. Fear loosens a little. That loosening allows blood to keep flowing to your skin instead of clamping down entirely. It changes the way your brain interprets the air on your face. It tells your deeper layers, this is uncomfortable, but it is not the end. Later, when it is time to sleep, you dim the lights more than you usually would. The Vikings lived in true darkness for long stretches, their only light a banked ember or a tallow candle. Your apartment is soaked in artificial glow, streetlights through the glass, devices, indicator LEDs from machines that hum even in standby. Some of that light literally tells your body to act as if it is still daytime, keeping your internal rhythms off balance and your sleep more fragile. You can't move to the Arctic. You can, however, help your own physiology at least a little. You switch off the big overhead light. You put your phone on the other side of the room or in another room entirely. If you need a light, you make it small and warm. Let shadows creep into the corners. Let your eyes notice that the day is over. As you slide into bed, under whatever blankets you own, you think, the way someone in a longhouse might, staring up into rafters they can barely see, about what you've actually done tonight. You didn't do anything legendary. You didn't march across ice or fight wolves with a spear. You didn't build a house from scratch or slaughter an animal with your own hands. You did small things, extra socks, a thicker curtain, a bowl of hot food with fat in it, a few squats, a phone call, a darker room. Individually, each of those things is unimpressive. Together, they form a miniature version of the system that once kept farmers and sailors alive through nights so cold your apartment will never know them. You have insulated, you have layered, you have moved. You have fed your inner fire, you have touched your social web. You have accepted, at least for a few hours, that winter is not a bug in reality, but a feature, and that your job is not to abolish it, but to live properly inside it. This is how principles survive across centuries. You do not need to worship Odin to know that meaning makes pain easier to carry. You do not need to believe in Norns to understand that pretending hardship is an error makes every hard thing feel like a personal betrayal. You do not need to live by a fjord to grasp that moving your body is a better answer to cold than simply messaging a landlord and then sitting in a chair shivering. In your own way, on your own small stage, you are rebuilding some of what we lost when we outsourced survival to technology and then forgot how to cope when technology hiccups. And it matters for more than just one night. If a storm knocks out power for a day, you will not be the only one in the dark. Your neighbours will be too. Some of them will have no idea how to function without that hum in the walls. They will sit in t-shirts and thin socks, fear rising, watching their breath cloud in the air, telling themselves that they're helpless until someone comes. You will still be cold, you will still be inconvenienced, but you will also know, in your bones, that heat comes from more than a wire. You will know that closing the curtains and taping towels over the windows buys everyone hours. You will know that inviting the person across the hall into your place, or going to theirs, gives you all the warmth of shared bodies, instead of wasting it in separate cooling rooms. You will know that a pot of soup made on a camping stove or a gas flame is more than food. It is a way of turning fuel into both calories and communal comfort. You will know that walking the stairs is not a silly thing to do in the dark, but a way to keep blood moving and stave off the chill that settles in when you sit and wait. You will know to pull the bed away from the exterior wall, to put everyone in one room, to layer blankets, to tell stories so that children's fear doesn't make them shake harder than they need to. You will know, in other words, how to make your own small longhouse in the ruins of the grid. And even on ordinary nights, in an intact world, their secret still matters. In an age of climate control, many of us have grown strangely fragile in the face of any discomfort. The moment we feel the air change, we look for a switch. When the switch doesn't answer, panic comes fast. Under that panic is something deeper. We have built a civilization that teaches us to expect a flat, unchanging temperature, a flat, unchanging level of ease. Winter, when it arrives, feels like a mistake. The Vikings did not have that luxury, and so they did not have that neurosis. For them, winter was the season of a story. Hard, sometimes lethal, but also full of its own textures. The intimacy of crowded rooms, the crack of ice, the taste of preserved food, the weight of furs, the particular sound of wind on a snowfield. They prepared for it. They dreaded some parts of it, but they did not stand in the doorway in January and say, "This shouldn't be happening." If you can borrow even a little of that stance, your own winters change. Instead of treating the first cold front as an insult, you treat it as a reminder. Time to dig out the wool, time to cook heavier things, time to plan social gatherings that make the dark less empty, time to accept that you will be outside your comfort zone more often, and that this, too, is part of being a body on a turning world. You might even find that some of your most peaceful moments come not when your apartment is overheated to the point where you forget there's a weather outside, but when you are aware of the cold at the edges and warmth at the centre, like sitting under a blanket with your hands around a hot mug, watching frost form on the glass, feeling the same fundamental contrast a farmer in Norway felt through turf and timber. In that sense, the real warmth Vikings carried wasn't just thermal, it was structural and social. They arranged their lives so that cold was survivable, and survivable in a way that did not depend on constant perfection from any one piece. They built redundancy into their houses, their clothes, their food stores, their daily rhythms, their alliances, their stories. They accepted that hardship would come, and therefore did not let every hardship shatter them. They leaned on each other, literally and metaphorically, and understood that sometimes the simplest act, sharing a bed, a meal, a task, was the difference between a night that kills and a night that merely tests. You do not need raiding parties and sagas to do the same. You need to look at your own life and ask, if the visible fire went out, if the grid failed, if the heating broke, if prices rose, if winter was harsher than usual, what would catch me? Is your answer only a technician's phone number? Or is it also a friend downstairs, a neighbour you've spoken to, a box of candles, a wool blanket you didn't throw away because it was old-fashioned, a willingness to move, to eat when you should, to breathe slower in the dark, and tell yourself, It's a storm. There have always been storms. The people of Viking times would not recognize your buildings, your screens, your cars. But if they could stand invisibly in your room on a cold night and watch you choose, layer by layer, to depend less on a single machine and more on your own body, your own mind, your own community, they might recognize something else. They might see you reaching, across 1,000 years, for the same invisible system that kept them alive when their own fires died. Not a trick, not a gadget, a way of living that understands that warmth is something you build in many places at once, in walls and wool and food and muscle and story and touch. One day, your power may go out for longer than is comfortable. One day, winter may bite harder than you expect. One day, you may find yourself in a dark room with nothing humming behind the walls and no guarantee of when that hum will return. On that day, the Vikings have something to offer you. Not the comfort of pretending it isn't serious, not the absurd bravado of pretending you are unbreakable, but a quiet set of answers written into the way they face their own nights. Slow the loss, layer what you have, use your body, feed your inner fire, stay near others. Remember that struggle is normal, not proof the world hates you. Hold to the knowledge that dawn comes, because it always has. The flames on the hearth can die, the grid can fail. You may be left staring at cold metal where warmth used to be. But if you have learned even a little what they knew, you will discover something they trusted with their lives. The most reliable warmth you will ever have is the kind that doesn't vanish when the lights go out. Somewhere, right now, it is winter for someone watching this. Maybe there's snow outside your window, maybe it's just rain and a bitter wind sneaking through thin glass. Maybe you're watching this on a crowded train, in a small apartment, in a warm house that suddenly doesn't feel as warm as it used to. Maybe you've never seen a fjord, never smelled smoke in a turf-roofed hall, never lain awake listening to a storm claw at wooden walls. And yet you've just walked through those winters in your mind. You've stood in a longhouse when the fire went out. You felt the weight of wool and the press of other bodies on a narrow bed. You've heard the old stories told in the dark and recognized something of your own life in them. The fear, the endurance, the small stubborn warmth that refuses to die. If this journey into Viking nights and hidden warmth has given you something, a new way to think about winter, a little more respect for your own resilience, or just a different kind of company in the dark, then I'd like to ask you one thing. Subscribe to Viking Times and leave a comment on where in the world you are watching from today, because this channel is its own kind of longhouse, scattered across countries and time zones, but gathered around the same fire of curiosity. The more of us there are here, the warmer these stories burn, and the more history we can bring back to life together.